Chapter 1532. After the palm retracted, the situation was in a stalemate. In that world, Hun Guzi and the others gathered countless true saint innate abilities to form a long river of divine ability and blasted it crazily towards the 5 palms. They used quantity to exchange for quality, forcefully blocking the palm that was many times more powerful than ordinary true saint innate abilities. On the other side, Luo Fan had unleashed the power of the karma net as much as possible. Although it seemed that he was only resisting the palm, the true sage level means in the karma net surged out endlessly. At every moment there were trillions of changes that surpassed the limits of a false sage. Because of the incomparably powerful opponent, the potential of the net of karma, which had already been developed by Luo Fan to the limit of what he could achieve, began to be triggered once again. The might of the karma net itself grew stronger and stronger as this process continued. Its transformation also grew more and more mysterious, more and more inconceivable. However, the power of the palm was much stronger than the karma net. At that moment, even though the karmic web was barely able to withstand the palm, it was still rather arduous. Furthermore, it was gradually sinking. As time passed, the karma net gradually retreated, but the palm gradually moved forward. If this situation continued, it could be predicted that one day, the palm formed by light and heat would definitely break through Luo Fan's defense. It would directly come into contact with the world where he was now. However, it wasn't just Luo Fan's karma net that was constantly being pushed back by the powerful palm. The other 10 divine ability rivers were also being pushed back by their own palms. Moreover, the speed at which they retreated was even faster than the speed at which Luo Fan's karma net retreated. Although the difference wasn't too big, speed was still speed. I thought I had the upper hand, but I didn't expect that I would suffer a loss. At this moment, Luo Fan's eyes shone. The expression of the desperation expert who was fighting him turned ugly at this moment. "Little guy, why don't we negotiate?" Suddenly, the desperation expert said to Luo Fan. "Negotiate? Could it be that this senior wants me to take the initiative to give up?" Luo Fan asked curiously. "Of course that's for the best. However, even if I wanted this, the others wouldn't agree to it. I can only helplessly give up." The despair one laughed. "Then what does senior plan to do?" Luo Fan became even more curious. The despair one said, "Why don't we change the way we fight? If this stalemate continued, it would probably take many years before there would be a result. This is a form of torture for both of us. Why don't we decide the outcome of the battle with a single move? This way we can end the battle quickly. It'll be beneficial for both of us." "End the battle quickly?" Luo Fan laughed. "Senior, why do you have to trick me? How could a quick battle benefit both of us? That's only good for senior. To me, that's a completely foolish choice." "How could that be? That way, you won't have to suffer anymore." The desperator laughed. "I'm not as good as you, senior. I know that. If he ended the battle quickly, the result would be my defeat and senior's victory. Wouldn't that be courting death?" Luo Fan said with a smile. "You have to have confidence in yourself," the despair one said. Luo Fan just shook his head. "Of course I have confidence in myself. That's why I plan to drag it out for a while. Who knows, I might be able to comprehend something and defeat senior." "You're too confident." The despair one laughed. He knew that words would not be able to sway Luo Fan. He didn't speak anymore. "Seniors, what exactly is your goal?" Seeing that he didn't say anything else, he asked. Luo Fan asked. "I can't say for now. But you will find out soon," the desperator said at this time. Luo Fan stood there and sighed inwardly. Although Huang Xiaolong had a vague guess as to the purpose of these despair warriors, he felt that they were here for Hun Guzi and the others, for the true saint rank esoteric or something related to a true saint, but he couldn't be completely sure. At this time, he wanted to know their true purpose from the despair ones, but he didn't expect them to be so secretive. They were still unwilling to give in even at this time. After Luo Fan and the despair ones stopped talking, the area fell into a rare silence. Time passed slowly. The 6 despair ones didn't use any other means. They just relied on the 6 palms condensed from light and heat that were many times more powerful than the true divine theurgy to slowly suppress the various defensive means that Luo Fan, Hun Guzi, and the others had used. After a few years, the 6 palms had already reached the vicinity of the world. Whether it was Hun Guzi's theurgy river or Luo Fan's karma web, they were all suppressed outside the world, and were about to come into contact with the world. If the palms really came into contact with the world, it was obvious that the world would be torn apart in an instant and the entire world would turn into countless fragments. At this time, there was a flash in the void and a strong true divine level aura rushed over, causing Luo Fan, Hun Guzi, and the others' expressions to change slightly. It even made the despair ones frown slightly. Amidst this change, dozens of false saints appeared in the void outside this world. These false sages were none other than the many true sages who had competed with Hun Guzi and the others to prove their Tao and become false sages with the true divine level mysteries. In the end, they had failed and were directly sent to the depths of the void. At this moment, after so many years, the disciples of the true sage had finally returned to this place. At this moment, they saw everything that was happening in this region of nothingness. Their expressions became extremely ugly. I didn't expect there to be such powerful existences hidden in the universe. It seems like we've really been frogs at the bottom of a well, Jean Chanzi said among the false sages. Although they were the losers, what they wanted the most, the chance to prove their Tao and become sages with the true divine level mysteries, had disappeared. However, this didn't mean that they didn't care about this powerful world anymore. It was the opposite. That world was still an extremely precious existence to them. However, they could still obtain great benefits from that world. They could prove their Tao and become sages in that powerful world and comprehend more true divine level mysteries. Thus, it was possible for their cultivation to once again obtain a huge increase in their cultivation realm. In this way, they could not just watch as this world was destroyed. Of course, they couldn't just watch as it was destroyed. At this moment, the actions of those desperators had obviously touched their reverse scale. This made each of them have a strong desire to destroy. They actually dared to come again. The desperator who was facing off against Luo Fan said with a frown. In the bet that the desperators had set previously, because he was chosen by Luo Fan, the palm he sent out went against Luo Fan's karma web. Among the 6 palms, he encountered the greatest difficulty. At this moment, he was already far behind the other 5. This had obviously made him quite annoyed. Just as he was about to find something to vent his anger, Jean Chanzi and the others appeared and stood there. Naturally, he was the first to respond. Why wouldn't we dare to come? Since we're the disciples of the sages, we naturally need to have a fearless heart, Jean Chanzi said lightly. Disciples of the sages. We used to be the disciples of the sages too. The desperator suddenly laughed. Used to be the disciples of the sages too? Jean Chanzi and the others heard this. They couldn't help but be shocked. Being the disciple of the sages was an extremely noble status. Once one was the disciple of the sages, one would be the disciple of the sages forever. If one was the disciple of the sages, it would expire. They, who had left the main world of the Earth universe billions of years ago and came to the myriad heavens and realms, were no longer the disciples of the sages. However, even though they were already powerful false sages now, they were still proud of being the disciples of the sages. They still didn't think that they were no longer the disciples of the sages. Under such circumstances, suddenly hearing someone say that they were once the disciples of the sages was a blasphemy to the identity of being the disciples of the sages. However, they were all stunned by what they saw. After being stunned for a while, an indescribable anger instantly filled all of their hearts. How dare you abandon this identity so casually? What do you think the sages are? A false sage said in an unprecedentedly cold and angry voice. Ha ha ha! the despair suddenly laughed out loud. This laughter kept coming from the major chiliocosm where he was, rushing towards the void and the myriad heavens and realms. It formed circles of strange ripples, producing all kinds of unimaginable light and shadows that spread in all directions. There seemed to be joy in the laughter, pain, and even the deepest despair. Hearing this laughter, the expressions of the false sages changed slightly. To be able to laugh like this, not only was he powerful, but the emotions hidden in his heart definitely surpassed everything. They couldn't help but start to ponder exactly what had happened to cause this person to laugh like that. The laughter of the despairing man continued for a long time before it gradually stopped. After stopping, he said to the false sages with a smile on his face, "Looking at you guys, it's as if I'm looking at my past self. Thank you for letting me recall that period of time in the past. In order to express my gratitude to you, I'll give you eternal peace." As soon as he finished speaking, a ray of light rushed out from the major chiliocosm. With a method that surpassed time and space and everything, it arrived in front of the dozens of false sages in a flash. That's right. Although it was just a small ray of light, it appeared in front of the dozens of false sages at the same time. Moreover, this contradiction was not disharmonious at all. From the looks of it, this ray of light was still the same, and it still looked the same. There was no change at all. Even the false sages could not help but be shocked when they saw this mysterious change. Oh no! Golden Monk and the others were horrified at the same time. Instinctively, their respective true sage mystical abilities instantly rushed out from their bodies, directly blocking in front of them and facing the light. At this moment, how could they still care about what kind of vicious cycle would occur when the true sage mystical abilities appeared so densely and caused the myriad heavens and realms to be completely destroyed? All they could think about was blocking this ray of light in front of them, that they could not sense any aura at all, but it was obviously mysterious beyond their understanding. Although that ray of light did not emit any aura, there was no doubt that it was powerful in nature. The true sage mystical abilities that Golden Monk and the others had used had the power to kill all false sages and destroy the myriad heavens and realms. However, in the face of this ray of light without any aura, they actually had no ability to resist at all. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The true sage mystical abilities collapsed one after another. Even though during this process, every true sage mystical ability had unleashed its potential to the limit and unleashed an infinite true sage level attack power, it still could not block this seemingly ordinary light. Moreover, the destruction of these dozens of true sage mystical abilities happened at the same time. It felt as if the world in the light was different from the world in the false sage's perception. The many false sages seemed to be scattered everywhere, but in the light they seemed to be overlapping. All the true sage mystical abilities seemed to be overlapping as well. This scene instantly caused the hearts of Jean Chanzi and the others to fill with indescribable despair. "Stop!" A faint voice came from the depths of the void. Immediately after, a strange finger blocked in front of the ray of light. This finger also had the characteristics of the light emitted by the Desperate. Similarly, it looked ordinary. But it was clearly a finger that could block all the light at the same time. Moreover, there was no awkwardness in the process. Everything seemed so natural with his fingers. With a soft poof, the light collided with the finger. In an instant, the two trembled slightly at the same time. Endless treasure light seemed to explode in an instant, sweeping through the myriad heavens and realms in a flash. It swept through all the worlds in the myriad heavens and realms. Even the eyes of all living beings were filled with it. However, very soon, before almost all living beings could react, the light had already disappeared. During this process, even the false sages only felt a slight blur in front of their eyes. They could not see the treasure light at all. The moment the light appeared, the finger and the light disappeared without a trace at the same time, as if they had never appeared. "Ho-hua, do you want to join in too?" The desperator, who had lost his composure and laughed, said faintly, "I'm not interested in joining in. It's just that I can't bear to see these existences that are considered our junior brothers and sisters die just like that," the voice said faintly. At the same time, somewhere in the depths of the void, a great thousand world was reflected in the eyes of the desperators. It was also reflected in the eyes of Luo Fan, who was inside that world. "There's another one." Luo Fan smiled bitterly at this moment. This existence that appeared later was obviously also a desperator. At least, it was an existence that was at the same level as these desperators. Just now there were only 6 of such existences, but they had already forced them to this step. Now that they were about to be completely annihilated, he did not expect that another existence of the same level would appear. How could he not feel helpless? However, he suddenly had some expectations. However, it seems that this so-called Ho-Wo won't sit back and watch Hunguzi and the others die. This might be a good thing. You can actually see me. It seems that you're the protagonist of this world calamity. Suddenly, the desperator in the Great Thousand World seemed to have sensed Luo Fan's gaze and suddenly laughed. Then, Luo Fan felt that the originally complete vast thousand domains had opened up in the blink of an eye, and everything inside began to appear in his eyes, big and small. Of course, this opening didn't mean that the Great Thousand World had really split apart. It was just that the existence that was blocking his sight had opened up, allowing him to observe all kinds of things in that world. Among them, there was a boy who seemed to be only 5 or 6 years old standing in the extremely narrow Great Thousand World. His eyes seemed to directly reflect Luo Fan's figure. This person's cultivation level is much stronger than the 6 of them. He is stronger than the 6 of them. Seeing this person clearly, Luo Fan instantly made a judgment in his heart. The basis of his judgment was none other than the size of the Great Thousand World. The stability of the space inside the Great Thousand World, the instantaneous stability, and the number of true sage-level mysteries contained in the Great Tao of the Great Thousand World. At this moment, the area of the Great Thousand World was nearly half of the Great Thousand World that the 6 desperators had imagined. In other aspects, it was much stronger than the 6 of them. All of this was enough for him to guess. The boy, who seemed to be only 5 or 6 years old, had a stronger cultivation. The protagonist of this world calamity. Luo Fan smiled bitterly at this time. He didn't care whether he was the protagonist or not. But now it seemed that even if he was originally the protagonist, he was now suppressed to the limit and almost couldn't control himself. Perhaps he would soon lose his life here. Although it was only a doppelganger projection. But it was also quite depressing to lose it. As the protagonist, I can give you a chance. The boy suddenly laughed. Luo Fan was slightly stunned when he heard that. What chance? A chance to fulfill your destiny. The boy laughed. Destiny? I don't like destiny. Luo Fan instinctively rejected this word and frowned. Oh, if you don't like destiny, then use luck Tao. Anyway, it's the same meaning. The boy said indifferently. Luo Fan's expression didn't change at all when he heard that. He was too lazy to open his mouth to refute this. The river of luck Tao had several levels. Even a true sage could only break through the level of an ordinary cultivator. But it was still controlled by a deeper level of the river of luck Tao. Under such circumstances, although Luo Fan was confident and ambitious, he had never thought that he would be able to completely cut off the connection with the river of luck Tao and get rid of the river of luck Tao's control. Therefore, even if he hated the words destiny and luck Tao, he couldn't deny that they really existed. However, he couldn't deny that it truly existed, and that it possessed supreme power that was faintly affecting him. Fulfill destiny. What do you mean? He paused for a while and asked. Of course, it means to become a desperator. The boy laughed. Luo Fan was taken aback. What was going on? When he was being attacked by other desperators and was almost out of breath, There was suddenly a desperator who said that he would be given a chance to become a desperator. This didn't make sense no matter how he looked at it. I don't understand. Luo Fan frowned and said, Perhaps you can understand that because I have been in despair for too long, there is already a psychological problem. Therefore, I want others to enjoy this kind of despair. If you think of it this way, perhaps you can understand. The 5 or 6-year-old boy laughed and said. This made Luo Fan couldn't help but feel an inexplicable sense of helplessness in his heart. The boy waited for a while and found that Luo Fan didn't speak, so he laughed and said, It seems that you want to accept this opportunity? Of course I accept. Perhaps despair is hard to bear. But if I can't even feel the despair that I should feel, then it's too sad. Luo Fan let out a long breath and said, Good. Not a bad mentality. I only hope that you can still maintain this mentality after you understand it, the boy praised. However, the inexplicable smile on his face made people feel a chill in their hearts. While the boy and Luo Fan were talking, Jin Chanzi, Hun Guzi, and the other false sages couldn't hear their conversation at all. From their point of view, they could only see Luo Fan's mouth opening and closing slightly, as if he was saying something. If they wanted to hear clearly what he was trying to say, or even if they wanted to distinguish what he was saying from the way his lips opened and closed, it was simply impossible. It was as if there was some power beyond their understanding that was isolating their understanding and confusing their senses. It seemed so mystical, so inconceivable. The reason for this was very simple. It was just like how those desperators had clearly appeared there before, but these false sages still didn't see them. It was because of the superiority of the desperators themselves. In other words, at this moment, the words that Luo Fan said and the voice that he heard were all transmitted through the essence of the desperator. Chapter 1533. The moment Luo Fan agreed, some kind of inexplicable wave swept across the void. This inexplicable fluctuation was so wonderful yet so incredible. In the blink of an eye, it swept across countless worlds and heavens. At this moment, the area where Luo Fan was located was also within the range of influence of this fluctuation. Whether it was the great 1,000 worlds of the despair, the palm of light and heat they displayed, the barrier of this world, or the river of supernatural powers created by Hun Guzi and the others, none of them were able to affect this fluctuation at all. It felt as if they were in a completely different dimension from this kind of fluctuation. Mind your own business. One of the desperators sighed. In this wave, Luo Fan faintly felt a sense of familiarity, but also strangeness. It was as if he had clearly felt it before, but it was also as if he had never felt it before. What the hell is this? Luo Fan was shocked, and this thought flashed through his mind. His thoughts were extremely fast, and countless thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. Amidst these countless thoughts, a bolt of lightning suddenly flashed, illuminating all of his emotions, illuminating all of his doubts. I see. Suddenly, a shocked expression appeared on Luo Fan's face. However, he had already remembered what this fluctuation was. He remembered why he had such a strange feeling of familiarity and strangeness towards this wave. This wave was similar to the wave that he had encountered in the world that he had opened up. It was the wave that enveloped the entire world when the great calamity descended. Of course, it was only a similar feeling, but not the same kind of wave. It was precisely because of this similar but not completely identical state. Just now, it gave him this familiar yet strange feeling. Looks like. You seem to understand what this is? The childlike desperator, who was also Hohua, discovered Luo Fan's abnormal expression and couldn't help but be curious. This should be the root of this world calamity, right? Luo Fan said with a somewhat disappointed expression. You actually found out? At this moment, Hohua wasn't the only one who spoke. Another despair one spoke at the same time. In addition to the despair man who spoke, the other despair men's faces also changed slightly. Obviously, for Luo Fan to be able to answer this question, It was already far beyond their expectations. It could even be said that it had already made them feel extremely shocked. You really aren't simple. Hou looked at Luo Fan. There was a faint smile on his face. At this time, Luo Fan did not care about their expressions. Instead, he carefully sensed this inexplicable fluctuation. If it was the great tribulation of heaven and earth, this kind of fluctuation was only an extremely insignificant fluctuation in the entire great tribulation of the world. To the great tribulation of heaven and earth, the most important thing was the evil aura that descended from the chaos, which could change the minds of all living beings and change the minds of all living beings. Luo Fan had paid more attention to the murderous aura during the previous great tribulations. It was just an insignificant fluctuation. However, he did not pay much attention to it. Because of this, although he had encountered stronger fluctuations many times, he still did not have much understanding of these fluctuations. What was the use of these fluctuations? What kind of power did they have? How would they affect him in the end? These types were all mysteries to him. Now that he had personally encountered these fluctuations, he obviously had no choice but to focus on these fluctuations. He tried his best to understand these fluctuations and find all the secrets of these fluctuations. There's no need to look, Hou said with a smile. Luo Fan frowned. How could he not look? Putting aside false saints, any ordinary cultivator would definitely pay a lot of attention to something that they could not understand when they encountered something that they could not understand, especially something that was targeted at them and that they could not understand. They would want to understand it completely. How could he give up on understanding the fluctuations that were about to be used against him at this time? Luo Fan stood there with a faint expression on his face. Hou's appearance was reflected in his eyes again. These fluctuations are the domain of a true sage. Unless you become a true sage, you won't be able to understand any of the mysteries within even if you become a despair one, Hou said with a smile. Since even a despair one can't understand any of the mysteries within, how did you control it and summon this fluctuation? Luo Fan frowned. I didn't control this fluctuation, nor did I summon this fluctuation. Hou shook his head and said, because this fluctuation has always been here. The reason why you couldn't feel it before but can feel it now is because I used some special methods to allow you to temporarily have my senses. Your senses? Luo Fan was shocked. He could naturally understand what was being said, but he found it a little hard to accept the content of the speech. At this time, he didn't feel that his senses were affected at all. He didn't feel any power. In fact, he didn't even feel anything affecting his senses. Under such circumstances, the despair one actually said that he had temporarily gained his senses. This situation was of course like a bolt from the blue to him, and he naturally found it hard to accept. Why? You don't believe me? Hou laughed. As he spoke, he didn't seem to do anything, but Luo Fan suddenly felt that the inexplicable fluctuation that he felt familiar and unfamiliar had suddenly disappeared into thin air, as if it had never appeared. During this process, he still didn't feel any changes in his senses. Everything about him was still exactly the same as before. There was still no difference compared to before. There was no change at all. This situation made him even more shocked. At this moment, he once again felt the presence of that fluctuation. It was as if that fluctuation had always existed here. How is it? Do you believe me now? Hou said. The facts were already in front of him. At this time, even if Luo Fan was unwilling to admit it, he could only accept that the despair one really controlled his senses when he couldn't feel it at all. It allowed his senses to perceive everything that the other party wanted him to perceive. It could also shield his senses so that he couldn't perceive anything that the other party didn't want him to perceive. This fact was obviously an indescribable grievance for him. For a moment, Luo Fan's expression became extremely ugly. How did you do it? Don't tell me you think that the ability of the despair one is only what you see? Ho laughed. Hearing this, Luo Fan's heart shook. Could it be that the true strength of the Despair One is actually that strong? Even a false sage can only be crushed by him? Impossible, right? However, looking at what the 6 Despair Ones were doing at this time, they were casually condensing light and heat to form a palm. It was already so oppressive that Luo Fan's karma net couldn't bear it. It also made Hun Guzi and the others unable to block the true sage's winding river with the support of heaven and earth. In this case, their own power might be even more terrifying. If a casual attack was already like this, how much stronger would it be if they really attacked seriously? Okay, no need to talk nonsense. Next, you can experience it carefully. Ho was no longer in the mood to talk anymore. After saying this faintly, Luo Fan suddenly felt that the surrounding fluctuation suddenly became many times stronger. Amidst these fluctuations, he could feel his mind and all of his senses. He felt everything about himself. They sank into the fluctuation. At this moment, his will transcended time and space. His mind entered an incomparably wondrous state. In this state, time and space no longer had any meaning. Where is this? He looked around and murmured. At this moment, he felt that he had entered a completely unfamiliar place. This place was surrounded by a gray haze. An indescribable pressure constantly squeezed him, making it extremely difficult for him to breathe. His whole body felt like it would completely collapse and be destroyed in the next moment. This is the source of despair. A voice entered Luo Fan's ears at this time. Then, a figure that looked like a 5 or 6-year-old boy appeared beside Luo Fan. This was obviously Ho Hua. The source of despair? Is it because of this that you're in despair? Luo Fan frowned. You're very smart. Ho Hua praised. Then what is this place? Why does it make you feel despair? Moreover, do you think that this place will also make me feel despair? Luo Fan asked with a frown. Ha ha ha! Ho Hua suddenly laughed loudly. An inexplicable sense of foreboding suddenly surged in Luo Fan's heart. He faintly felt that something was not right. After a while, Ho Hua finally stopped laughing and said, "That's the mentality. Your performance is too perfect." Luo Fan frowned but did not say anything. Only by destroying the hope in your heart with this mentality will my efforts not be in vain, Ho Hua said excitedly and satisfactorily. Hearing this, Luo Fan felt even worse. This is the origin of the realm. Ho Hua chuckled. The origin of the realm? What's that? Luo Fan frowned deeply and asked. The origin of the realm is not a place that actually exists, nor is it something that actually exists. It is just the appearance of a kind of realm that is materialized. It is also an existence that can be sensed by false sage-level existences after their senses are enhanced to a certain level. Perhaps you've already guessed it. That's right, this vast and boundless origin of the realm represents all the origins that a false sage needs to master if he wants to become a true sage. Ho Hua laughed loudly. That laughter contained unimaginable despair. This kind of despair penetrated deep into the bone marrow and was so thick that it almost condensed into a substance. Luo Fan was already stunned at this moment. Through Ho Hua's explanation, he had already clearly felt that in the boundless grayness in front of him, every trace and every wisp, they all represented a kind of extreme profoundness. Extremely profound profoundness. This kind of profoundness was so obscure and ordinary that at first glance, one would not even think that it was a profoundness. However, as long as one took a closer look, they would discover that those profoundness were all kinds of true sage-level profoundness. This kind of profoundness was complicated and profound. It was far beyond the scope that a false sage could understand. At least, it was within the scope that he could understand in a short period of time. If he wanted to master any one of these profoundness, he would probably have to spend hundreds of millions of years to do so. And in front of Luo Fan, in this endless dusk, even a palm-sized piece of it would not be able to survive. There were probably thousands of true sage-level profoundness in it, and he actually had to master this endless grayness in front of him in order to become a true sage. This was probably something that could only be achieved by surpassing the limits of numbers. This was enough to make anyone despair. How is this possible? Luo Fan muttered. He lifted his foot and took a step forward. The pressure that the surrounding grayness gave him was so strong that it was as if tens of thousands of worlds were pressing down on him at the same time. If he was not a genuine false sage and was using the heavenly cauldron of the divine court as his body, he would not be able to move under such pressure. It was impossible. Under such pressure, one could imagine how difficult it would be for him to move forward. At this moment, although he was already advancing with a method that could normally cross hundreds of millions of light-years with a step, in the end, he was still like a snail. He only moved less than a meter after taking hundreds of steps. There's no need to waste your effort. Without comprehending that realm's origin, it's impossible for you to move to that position as you please, Ho was said at this moment. Hearing this, Luo Fan stood there in a daze. An indescribable despair appeared on his face. Ha ha! That's right, that's right. That's the expression. I like to see this expression. Ho laughed loudly. Hearing this, Luo Fan came back to his senses. He gritted his teeth and said, I don't believe it. If that's the case, how can there be sages in this world? You don't know this. Those sages, every one of their achievements were achieved by chance and coincidence. Even they themselves can't clearly describe what happened in the process of becoming sages. Moreover, none of them need to go through the stages of false sage and false sage. They're only quasi-sages, and unknowingly, they're already true sages. In fact, I remember that there was a true sage who didn't even reach the quasi-sage level, but directly became a Khanate Grand Luo. He jumped to true sage in one jump. Ho smiled, but there was a hint of madness in his eyes. This madness was hidden very deeply, but it was so strong that it could burn everything. It was enough to destroy everything. How's that possible? Luo Fan murmured. That's how it is. Things in this world are just that unfair. Ho smiled. Are you in despair now? Ho smiled. Luo Fan's expression was blank, but he couldn't say anything. It's good that you're in despair. Since you're in despair, then you're a despairing person. From today onwards, you're one of us. Ho smiled, looking extremely happy. However, Luo Fan could feel a powerful desire to destroy the world repressing and brewing in his heart. It could erupt at any time and completely destroy everything. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt the pressure on his body increase by a few hundred times. Under this pressure, he was forced out of the source of the realm, the source of despair. His eyes flashed and the pressure disappeared. He found himself back in that world, back near Jing Yitzi. At the same time, he clearly felt some kind of mysterious and strange mystery leave his body. So, it's this mystery that controls my senses. In an instant, he understood and instantly knew what this mystery was used for. Of course, he only knew how this profound mystery worked. As for what kind of profound mystery it was, he still couldn't do it. Then, he felt the changes in his body. At this moment, the many mysteries of the true divine theurgy became so clear in his eyes. In a trance, he almost felt that the true divine theurgy was actually similar to the false divine theurgy, as if it was already within the scope of his complete control. He gently raised his hand, and a net of karma appeared on his finger. It began to change crazily. It evolved crazily, and its power began to increase endlessly. In the short span of a few breaths, it had already risen to the level of the super net of karma that was blocking the palm in front of him right now. The whole process was not forced at all. It was straightforward and unimaginably smooth. However, the power of the net of karma was not limited to this level. It began to continue to grow and evolve. Vaguely, it actually gradually changed into a gray appearance. In a trance, It seemed to have the same grayish realm origin that he had seen not long ago. The gray color on the net of karma became more and more. There were more and more true divine level mysteries in it. In the end, after reaching a certain level, the net of karma suddenly collapsed. Incomparably powerful energy surged in all directions, directly causing a hole that went deep into the great Tao to collapse in the heaven and earth, which originally did not suffer any real damage during the battle between the true sages. The strong destructive wave instantly attracted everyone's attention, causing an indescribable look of horror to appear on Jing Yixi's face. Previously, in the process of Luo Fan and Ho Hua's conversation, although Jing Yixi was not far away from Luo Fan, because the way they talked was extremely mysterious, he had no idea what they were talking about. At that time, he was already bewildered. He felt extremely bad. Then, he realized that Luo Fan and a certain someone had stopped talking for a while and stood there in a daze for a while. Then, he realized that Luo Fan had suddenly released his true divine theurgy. Moreover, the true divine theurgy's power increased at an unimaginable speed until it could easily destroy him. Then, it suddenly collapsed, causing the world to explode. This caused the uneasiness in his heart to soar to the limit. Finally, he did not dare to stay by Luo Fan's side any longer. His body retreated far away. After retreating, Jing Yixi's face turned cold and he said, "I didn't expect Taoist friend to have such a deep secret." At this moment, Luo Fan naturally heard his voice, but he did not have the time to care about him. He only had this thought in his mind. As expected, I'm still far from being able to do it. The sudden collapse of the karma web was indeed out of his expectations. However, after thinking about it for a while, he understood why it was like this. After being guided into the origin source by Ho Hua, although he could no longer enter it like before, he could already feel the existence of the origin source at any time. He could also clearly see the endless mysteries of the true divine realm hidden in the origin source. This was actually like looking at a small flaw on a perfect object. When no one reminded you, it was extremely difficult to find the flaw. You might even need professional knowledge to find it. However, when you were reminded of the existence of the flaw, the first thing you noticed when you looked at the perfect object again would definitely be the flaw. At this moment, Luo Fan was like this. After seeing the origin source once, although Ho Hua no longer lent his senses to him, he could already notice the existence of the origin source as if it was a flaw. It was precisely because he could notice the existence of the origin source that his senses had been enhanced by many times. At the same time, it was also because he saw the existence of the origin source that the true divine ability was no longer so unreachable in his eyes, and he could naturally control it more freely. Due to all these reasons, Luo Fan was able to discover the source of Ho Hua's control over his senses, and it was also the reason why he used an unimaginable method to activate the power of the karma web. As for why the karma web collapsed on its own, the reason was even more simple. Luo Fan was able to increase the power of the net of karma by stimulating it, by simulating the origin of his realm. Under such circumstances, when the stimulation exceeded the limits of the karma web could only collapse. After lamenting the limits of his ability, Luo Fan suddenly smiled. Although I'm still not strong enough, no matter what, I should be considered a hopeless person. Chapter 1534. At this moment, Luo Fan had already woken up from the despair he felt when he saw the origin of the realm. However, he already knew that he was almost dragged into the gutter by Ho Hua. That's right, the origin of the realm was indeed so vast that it could make any false sage feel despair. However, this should not include Luo Fan. For other false sages, if they wanted to become true sages, the only way they could choose was to completely master all the mysteries of true sages in the origin of the realm and comprehend all the principles contained within. In the end, they would be able to undergo a transformation in their own nature, turning the false into the true and becoming a true sage. However, for Luo Fan, the way to become a sage was not like that. This was because Luo Fan had an advantage over other false sages. That was because he had seen the real way to become a sage in the great Tianyuan world, so he had already understood the key to becoming a true sage. He understood the importance of sorting out his own unique worldview that was completely in line with his own temperament. Under such circumstances, if he wanted to become a sage, he did not need to force himself to master every bit of the mysteries of true sages to become a true sage. Instead, he only needed to raise his worldview to the level of a true sage. In other words, he would be able to perfectly explain everything in the perfect world and even easily construct a perfect world with this worldview. He would already be able to exist freely in the state of chaos. By then, he would naturally become a true sage. In other words, no matter how vast the origin of the realm that he had seen before was, how could it hinder him from becoming a true sage? On the contrary, the more vast the origin of the realm was, the more mysteries of true sages he could comprehend from it. It would be able to raise the power of his Shentong to a higher level, which was a great thing. Just like now, although he had just been able to sense the existence of the origin of the realm through his senses, his strength had already improved tremendously at this moment. The 7 desperados that he had originally thought to be unfathomable to him were now able to see through their levels. It seems that a new desperation has been born. One of the 6 desperators who attacked the heaven and earth said with a smile. Looking at him, he seemed to be gloating, and there was even an inexplicable madness in his expression. My name is Daoshui. How should I address you, fellow Taoist? Another despair one asked with a smile. These people in despair didn't even bother to talk to the false sage under the true sage. They didn't even bother to know their names. Now that Luo Fan had become a person in despair, they instantly changed their attitude and treated him as their friend. Hearing this, Luo Fan composed himself and smiled. I am Luo Fan. Luo Fan, it seems like you really aren't a disciple of a true saint. No wonder I've never seen you before, Ho Hua said. Next, the other 5 desperators also introduced themselves to Luo Fan at this time. The desperation warrior who was fighting against Luo Fan was called Qiangua, and the others were called Huang Fei, Wu Chuang, Qi Yi Sang Yao. These names. Obviously, they were changed after they became desperators, but they didn't have the characteristic of using Z as a title like those under the true sage. In this strange battlefield, the 2 sides seemed to have met by chance in a cave residence and introduced themselves to each other. It was impossible to tell that they were still enemies at this moment. They couldn't tell that the world where Luo Fan was would be completely torn apart by those desperators at any time. Now that fellow Taoist is a desperator, do you know our purpose? Qiangua, who was fighting against Luo Fan, said with a smile. Hearing this, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. In a trance, he already knew what they were thinking. For a moment, he couldn't help but feel a little confused. Could it be that fellow Taoists are planning to use the characteristic of Hun Guzi and the others to become false sages with true sage-level mysteries as a catalyst to strengthen their understanding of the origin of the realm? Luo Fan guessed. I didn't expect you to really think of it. Qiangua laughed. You've just become a desperator, but you actually thought of the plan that we've been planning for tens of thousands of years. You're really born to be a desperator. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. These words seemed to be good words, but why did it sound so awkward to him? However, it's also very difficult to succeed. Hun Guzi and the others only relied on that little bit of true sage-level mysteries to become false sages. Compared to the true sage-level mysteries in the origin of the realm, it's simply insignificant. How is it useful at all? Luo Fan frowned. You don't know this. Another desperator, Qi Yi, laughed at this moment and said, What we want is not the true sage-level mysteries themselves, but the process of how these true sage-level mysteries appear. Hearing this, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization and instantly understood what they were thinking. It turned out that what these desperators valued was the false sage-level mysteries, and how the mysteries that were not even false sage-level could finally become true sage-level mysteries through various combinations and transformations. One must know that the endless great Tao fragments that formed this world were all great Tao fragments that could only give birth to false sages. How could there be any true sage-level mysteries in such great Tao fragments? However, it was precisely the unbelievable number of great Tao fragments that did not have any true sage-level mysteries that were combined and evolved to give birth to this world that had true sage-level mysteries. That was obviously a state of turning the false into the real. To those who had lost all hope after understanding how difficult it was to become a true divine, this was of great value. Naturally, they would go after it like a flock of ducks. After understanding this, Luo Fan smiled bitterly. I see. Looks like fellow Qianguo was fooling me just now. At first glance, this guess seemed to be similar to his previous guess, but that was only at first glance. After careful analysis, one would know that the two were clearly polar opposites and were far apart from each other. Therefore, his guess could be said to be completely wrong. However, it was precisely such a wrong guess that Qianguo actually said that he had guessed correctly just now. If this wasn't fooling him, what was it? Qianguo laughed and said, "How can I be fooling you? I didn't say anything to say that you guessed correctly. I only said that you thought of it." This was completely a game of words. Luo Fan shook his head helplessly. He turned to look at Hun Guzi and the others and could not help but feel some pity for them. Since it's for that process, why didn't you guys make a move when this world was born? Why did you guys wait until Hun Guzi and the others became false sages with the true sage-level mysteries? Luo Fan asked. It's very simple. Without the suppression of these false sages, these true sage mysteries will live and die with this world. If this world is destroyed and the great Tao is extracted, those true sage mysteries will disperse again and become false sage-level mysteries, Ho Hua said with a smile. Hearing this, Luo Fan came to a realization. The existence of false sages would form a suppressive effect on the world. This kind of suppression was enough to make the world become extremely stable, making the great Tao of this world become inseparable. An inseparable whole. This was not the will of the false sages, but their instincts. It was the effect of their subconscious. To the false sages, the integrity of the world had an intrinsic impact on their existence. In other words, it was related to their lives. Under such circumstances, maintaining the integrity of this world was equivalent to the survival instinct of these false sages. However, they did not need to control it. They did not need to think much because their nature would naturally complete this step. This was a fact that could not be reversed and changed. To these people in despair, what they needed was this kind of suppression. To comprehend how the false sage profound mysteries evolved into true sage profound mysteries, this was an extremely difficult process that required a lot of time and energy. Even these people in despair wanted to comprehend this. They also had to extract those true sage profound mysteries. They even had to extract the great Tao. In order to ensure that these true sage profound mysteries still existed after being extracted and did not degenerate, they needed the suppression of the false sages. After understanding this, Luo Fan knew that he could no longer stop these people in despair from dealing with Hun Guzi and the rest. Helpless, he could only say, "Fellow Taoists, can you guarantee their safety?" "I can't guarantee that." Qianguo laughed. "Next, we have to extract the essence of their false sages and completely integrate it with the great Tao. Then, we will divide a part of it. Their lives, however, must be taken." Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but frown. Although Qianguo had directly rejected him, he knew that what he said was the truth. These people in despair were not one. There were also conflicts and frictions between them. Of course, it was impossible for them to be together for a long time. Since that was the case, and they were unwilling to give up on Hunguzi and the rest, they naturally had to divide the great Tao. Naturally, they had to divide the true sage profound mysteries. Once it was divided, in order to ensure the mysteries of the true sage after the division and ensure that the great Tao after the division did not collapse or degenerate, the existence of these false sages was not enough. However, they also needed to completely integrate the essence of the false sages so that the power of the essence of the false sages could suppress the various mysteries and the great Tao. Once they wanted to do that, the death of Hunguzi and the rest would obviously be inevitable. Then I'm sorry. Luo Fan sighed. With a thought, the karma net that was blocking Qian Guo's palm trembled slightly. Endless mysterious light was produced within it, and endless true sage profound mysteries were displayed within it. In the blink of an eye, the power of the karma net increased by thousands of times. Originally, the karma net was about to be pushed back into the world by the palm. Now that its power had suddenly increased, it instantly counterattacked, causing the palm formed by light and heat to be slapped back. Moreover, because the power of the karma net had increased, the many true sage profound mysteries that the palm had evolved were unable to resist. Before the entire palm could react, it had already been crushed to pieces. Qian Guo instantly withdrew from the battle, and the other people in despair were given the right to fight for this world. Are you going to protect them? Qian Guo shouted furiously. After all, I already have some friendship with them. How can I bear to watch them be killed by you? Luo Fan sighed. As he spoke, he did not stop moving. As the karma net danced, it instantly caught the 5 palms that Hunguzi and the rest had sent out. In the blink of an eye, the 5 palms were wrapped in the karma net. After that, the might of the net of karma erupted endlessly, and it instantly crushed the 5 palms, causing the light and heat that formed the 5 palms to collapse in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the 5 palms vanished into nothingness. Everything that happened in front of him happened very quickly, whether it was Hunguzi or the rest. At that time, Jin Chanzi and the rest, who had just returned to help Hunguzi and the rest resist the unknown attack, could not react for a moment. They did not know why things had suddenly developed in such a strange way. Jing Yitzi, who had been watching Luo Fan from nearby, was now staring blankly at Luo Fan. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Although Luo Fan was powerful, he was still within the scope of understanding of these true divine disciples. At least, they clearly knew. What was the reason why Luo Fan was stronger than all of them? They knew in what aspect Luo Fan was stronger than them. However, at this time, this Luo Fan, who had not left at all and had not even sensed which aspect of his strength, had suddenly increased by tens of thousands of times. How could he not feel incredulous? What the hell happened? Why did he suddenly become so powerful? This thought flashed across Jing Yitzi's mind. Vaguely, the originally clear figure in front of him seemed to have been shrouded by some kind of strange fog. It was as if he had been shrouded in some sort of strange fog, causing him to feel as if his senses were no longer sufficient. At this time, Hunguzi and the rest finally reacted. The winding river of true divine theurgy that they had sent out had stopped in an instant, causing the winding river to be cut off from its source. However, it was a pity that they had only cut off the source. The endless true divine remarkable powers that they had sent out previously still existed and were still flying towards the karma web that was blocking their way and crushing the 5 terrifying palms. Right at this moment, after the karma net had crushed all the palms, with a turn, it had already wrapped around the 10 winding river of true divine theurgy. With a burst of power, the true divine theurgy was crushed one by one. This time, although it was a clash between the true divine god skills, there were no more layers of treasure lights that were revealed. During this process, there were only specks of light shining brightly like stars in the sky. The incomparably dense rays of light were like stars in the void, appearing so beautiful and so strange at the same time. The speed of the winding river of divine theurgy was extremely fast. All of them crashed into the net of karma and were instantly torn apart by the net of karma. They completely turned into specks of light and disappeared without a trace. How is it? Do you regret it now? At this time, Qiangua said to Hohua, Regret what? When I started taking action, I'm afraid you guys already guessed that this would happen. You guys didn't stop me, so why should I, who didn't participate in this matter, regret it? Hohua chuckled at this time, and there was no trace of regret on his face. Although I guessed it, I'm still a little disappointed when it actually happened. Qian sighed. The expressions of the other despair men changed slightly. Some of them seemed to be annoyed and some seemed to be eager to try. At this time, Luo Fan's karma net had completely blocked all internal and external worries. Then, the net of karma shuddered slightly, and with a single sweep, it completely enveloped the entire world. However, at this time, the karma net no longer looked like a silk net. Instead, it looked like a mass of gray clouds. It wrapped the heaven and earth, as if the heaven and earth were covered by clouds and mist. It seems like we still have to fight. At this time, a voice suddenly rang in Luo Fan's ears. This voice came from Qiangua. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but from this voice, Luo Fan could hear that he seemed to be a little excited. However, no matter what the other party's mentality was, he had already expected to fight. At this time, he didn't change his expression because of this. In fact, he didn't even care about what Qiangua would do. Instead, he turned his gaze to Hun Guzi and the others and said, I can't hold these experts for long. Their target is your false divine theurgy. If you want to avoid being killed by them, the only way is to give up the false divine theurgy. However you choose, it's up to you. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Hun Guzi and the others' expressions changed drastically. They want our false divine theurgy? They found it hard to believe. The existences that attacked them just now were so strong that they even felt as if they were facing their masters, who were true sages. Why would such existences be interested in ordinary false divine theurgy? No matter how they looked at it, it was as ridiculous as a billionaire being interested in a beggar's clothes and wanted to kill the beggar to take them away. They instinctively wanted to refute. But soon, they had already noticed the growth and change in Luo Fan's strength. For a moment they couldn't refute. The weight of the speaker's words changed according to the speaker's strength. Luo Fan was much stronger than them. The weight of his words was already very strong. Now that his words had suddenly increased by tens of thousands of times, he could even easily deal with the attacks that they had to rely on the support of the world to barely be defeated. Naturally, the weight of his words had become even stronger. With such weight, they had to consider Luo Fan's suggestion. They began to think about whether they should do as he said and give up the false divine theurgy that they had just painstakingly obtained. This was the false divine theurgy in this world. Luo Fan didn't care what they thought. At this moment, he had already placed his attention on Qiangua. Although he couldn't bear to see them die because of his friendship with Hun Guzi and the others, so he wanted to help them block the pressure that they couldn't resist at all. But this didn't mean that he was really pedantic to the point of disregarding life and death. If it didn't threaten his life, he was naturally willing to block it for them. However, if the situation developed to a point where it threatened his life, he would definitely give up immediately. He would let them fend for themselves. In fact, he thought that he was already being extremely benevolent by helping them now. Just as Luo Fan took action and used his karma web to protect the world, Jin Chanzi and the others who were outside the world all understood. The matter here was no longer something that they could meddle in. Therefore, they looked at each other and made a prompt decision. They turned around and left without saying a word. They went straight into the depths of the void. Not long after, everyone had left, and the place returned to its original empty state. Let's do it, Luo Fan said to Qiangua. After his senses were enhanced, when he looked at Qiangua and the others who were in despair, he no longer needed to focus as much as before to be able to see them. Instead, He could easily see them with a glance. It was as if they were standing in front of him through the void, layers of time and space, and layers of heaven and earth. Even at this moment, he could still faintly see them. In addition to Hou-Hua, Qian-Gua, and the others, there were more than a dozen strange individuals that existed in his senses. However, it seemed that because those individuals did not pay attention to this place, and did not want to participate in the matters here, Luo Fan could only see blurry shadows of them. It was as if they were completely shrouded in some kind of strange fog. No matter how hard he tried to look and observe, he couldn't see anything. He couldn't even see where they were or what they looked like for these desperate people. This change in their individual senses made it seem as if Luo Fan was now in the same dimension as them, and they were no longer separated by some strange barrier like before. Of course, this also meant something else. That was, the number of despaired ones in the myriad heavens and realms was much more than expected. Moreover, there were a lot more of them. Those strange individuals were obviously despaired ones. Are you ready? Qian-Gua had a faint smile on his face at this time. Chapter 1535. Helplessly, he could only nod and say, "Come on." With that, he did not wait for Qian-Gua to make a move. Instead, he casually pointed his finger and a strange palm directly stretched out from heaven and earth, grabbing the vast thousand world where Qian-Gua was located. This palm was completely condensed by power. However, it did not simply contain power. What was faintly flowing in it was the incomparably rich true divine occult. This true divine occult was taken from the karma net, and it faintly resonated with the true divine occult that he had seen in the origin of the realm. Its power was many times stronger than that of a true divine theurgy. In the face of this palm, Qian-Gua only smiled faintly. Then, from his vast thousand world, a ray of light rushed out, transformed in the void, and turned into a sharp blade, directly colliding with Luo Fan's palm. This sharp blade contained the aura of a true divine theurgy, which was stronger than any true divine theurgy that Luo Fan had ever felt before. It felt as if a true divine had personally taken action. This sharp blade surpassed time. As soon as it appeared, it had already come into contact with Luo Fan's energy palm. In an instant, layers of treasure light, which was enough to completely cover the entire heavens and myriad realms, began to erupt from the point of contact between the two. It directly swept through the heavens and myriad realms, enveloping all the worlds in the void, all the space-time, and all the heavens and earth. Faintly, there was even a feeling that the heavens and myriad realms were shaking slightly, as if they could not bear the shock caused by this impact. The true divine theurgy contained in the palm of Luo Fan was many times stronger than that of a true divine theurgy. Its power was even stronger than his karma net. Not to mention the sharp blade of Qian-Gua. The terrifying power contained in it was even stronger than that of almost any true divine theurgy, including Luo Fan's karma net. When such two kinds of existences collided and produced an unreserved battle, the scene was shocking and terrifying. But it could be imagined. If it wasn't for the fact that the worlds and lands here all had their own mysteries and protective powers, just the tremors alone would have been enough to kill them. Perhaps it was already enough to destroy all these worlds. Fortunately, the disciples of the Golden Monk and the other sages were fast enough. Otherwise, if they were still here at this time, just this kind of impact alone would be enough to take away half of their lives. At that instant, the resonance between Luo Fan's palm and the realm source became even more intense. The mysteries of the true divine realm flowed within it as the resonance increased, and the power it displayed increased as well. Following this process, it became stronger and stronger. However, he had just become a despaired. How could his ability to use the origin of the realm compare to Qian-Gua, who had been a despaired for billions of years, or even countless eras? Although the transformation of his palm was mysterious and unpredictable, the transformation of Thousand Kingdoms' sharp blade. But it would only be deeper and more mysterious than him. Under such circumstances, The result of the battle between the two could easily tell what the trend was. Although the palm was constantly changing, countless seals, hand signs, and hundreds of millions of mysteries of the true divine realm were added to it. However, under the even more complicated and profound transformations of the sharp blade, it was shattered bit by bit and crushed bit by bit. Although the process of being crushed was extremely slow, the trend was incomparably firm, as if there was no way to reverse it. Seeing such changes, Luo Fan's heart didn't waver at all. On the contrary, he had entered a strange state during this process. He could faintly feel that the mysteries of the true saint grade in the origin source were like a flood that had broken through a dam, continuously pouring into his heart. Gradually, more and more marks were left in his heart, becoming more and more profound. These were none other than the true divine realm mysteries that were brought about by the resonance of the origin of the realm that he had released at that moment. It was a pity that although these true divine realm mysteries poured into his heart, they didn't leave a complete mark in it. It was as if tens of thousands of true divine realm mysteries had flowed through, and only one could leave a faint mark in his heart. The reason for this was also very simple. Although Luo Fan could already see the existence of the origin of the realm, he was still a false saint. The endless changes contained in the true divine realm were still too complicated for him. Even though he had already obtained the qualifications to comprehend it, he would still need to spend an extremely long time and a great amount of energy in order to truly comprehend it. Of course, it was impossible for him to retain the mysteries that had flowed through his heart so easily. However, even if it was just a tiny and blurry trace, it was already a huge improvement for him. Almost at every moment, he felt that his cultivation realm was increasing. And it turned out that after he became a false saint, he hadn't felt this for a long time. And this kind of improvement made his perception of the origin of the realm become clearer and clearer. He was also getting clearer and clearer about the true divine realm's mysteries. Faintly, he even felt that he was evolving towards a state where he could step into the origin of the realm with the help of Ho Hua's senses. Under these various changes, the changes made by Luo Fan's palm became more and more repetitive and more profound. The mysteries of true life that were triggered from the source of his cultivation also became more and more numerous. I didn't expect him to enter the zone so quickly. It seems that after this calamity, we will have one more member. Looking at the changes in Luo Fan's body, Qi suddenly sighed. To these people in despair, although Luo Fan had already obtained their recognition, he could barely be considered as a person in despair. But because he had just stepped into this level, he was like a baby to them. Therefore, they did not really accept Luo Fan before. However, if Luo Fan's strength could be raised to a sufficient level, in the end, when they could take him seriously or even threaten them, they would naturally accept him and treat him as a companion that they could plot with, and fight together with. It's not that simple, Dao Shui said with a smile. We can have such strength. It's accumulated from a few calamities. No matter how much of a genius he is, it's impossible for him to catch up without the time of a calamity. From the fact that many of the false saints under the sages had never heard of a calamity, it could be seen how long the time between the two calamities was. How long was the interval between them? It was possible to know. A calamity represented a terrifying amount of time. This Dao Shui actually said that Luo Fan needed a calamity to catch up to them. This was enough to show how powerful they were and how weak Luo Fan was in their eyes. That's not for sure, Chuang Wu said calmly. This person is very likely to be the main character of this calamity. Anything that happened to him, any miracle that happened, it would not be strange. Maybe in the next moment. What if he suddenly had an epiphany and his strength directly surpassed ours? That's just a possibility. At least his main character halo is still not obvious. Yao Seng sighed. Those with the main character halo must be the main character. But those without the main character halo might not be the main character. Who can be sure of this kind of thing? Huang Fei, the other despair, laughed at this moment. The few of them were chatting casually, but Qian Guo was unhappy. Are you guys watching a show here? This is indeed a good show, Dao Shuai said very seriously. What does it matter? What's the point of time to us? Even this time. If we divide up those false saints, will we really achieve the effect we want? On this point, I think you guys are all very clear about this. So, it's better to take this opportunity to relax. Qi laughed. You guys don't think the chances are high. Why don't you give them all to me? Qian Guo said disdainfully. That won't do. Although the chances aren't high. But it's still an opportunity, isn't it? What if I'm lucky and happen to seize that small opportunity? Chuang Wu laughed. We can't take chances. Qian Guo could only say. What about you? Aren't you taking chances too? Chuang Wu laughed directly at Qian Guo. Hearing this, Qian Guo was silent. As Chuang Wu said, these people came here, in fact, holding a glimmer of hope. Moreover, this matter seemed to be very simple at this time, and would be completed very smoothly. But these people were all existences who had experienced many world tribulations. They all knew clearly that things would not be so simple, and would not end so smoothly. Every world tribulation, even for them, was a great challenge. No matter how simple and smooth something seemed, once it was placed in the calamity of the world, it would become complicated and confusing. Perhaps some changes that seemed extremely simple and ordinary would eventually evolve and expand to the point that they, the people in despair, would truly be dragged into the abyss of despair, never to be reincarnated. This kind of thing had happened too many times in the previous few world tribulations, which made each of them vigilant. It was also because of this vigilance that although these despairs seemed to have attacked with all their strength, in fact, they only used a small part of their strength. More of their thoughts and more of their strength were actually on guard against other unknown changes, wanting to resist the possible accidents at any time. Therefore, at this time, their performance was not much different from that of Luo Fan. There was no absolute crushing advantage at all. Suddenly, Luo Fan shouted softly. Suddenly, another palm appeared beside the palm that he had sent out. This palm was also condensed by strength. It also contained the endless mysteries of the true divine, and also resonated with the origin of the realm. After this palm appeared, it began to merge with the palm that had appeared here before. The two cooperated and constantly made all kinds of incredible hand seals and hand seals. Although there was only one more palm, the changes of the hand seals were already 100 times, 1,000 times more than the original. At this moment, the power of the hand seals that the two palms made suddenly skyrocketed, and in an instant, it actually suppressed Qian Guo's sharp blade. In the blink of an eye, the crushing of the sharp blade was stopped. 2 hands? That's good too. Qian Guo smiled. With a point of his hand, another ray of light rushed out of his boundless world, condensing into a shield in the void. This shield also surpassed time. Almost at the same time that it was formed, it had already arrived in front of Luo Fan's palm. Together with the sharp blade that he had released before, it fought with the two palms. The cooperation between the sharp blade and the shield was also endless. With the sudden addition of the shield, Qian Guo's side's attack ability instantly gained the upper hand. Once again, Luo Fan's two palms were pressed back. However, at this moment the two palms were pushed back and they were in a crumbling state. Compared to the beginning, it was more than 10 times slower. The two palms cooperated with each other. After all, compared to the combination of the shield and the sharp blade, the changes were more complicated, more mysterious, and the potential was also greater. Although Qian Guo used the combination of the sharp blade and the shield to close the gap between the two sides, the gap was still a gap, and it was not so easy to eliminate for such a change. The current Luo Fan was completely not concerned about it. Because, when he suddenly displayed the second palm just now, he already felt that he had broken through the barrier between the origin of the realm and himself. Although his entire body had yet to step into the realm of origin, he had already probed his head into it. Although the origin of the realm was illusory and did not even exist, but, from the endless true divine mysteries contained in it, it could be seen that the origin of the realm itself was not simple. In fact, the origin of the realm was a kind of existence that surpassed heaven and earth, beyond the great way. This kind of existence, it was not in any heaven and earth, not in any power, and not in any great way. It was connected with the state of chaos. In other words, it was actually a state of chaos from a certain point of view. This was actually very easy to understand. For any cultivator, once they became a sage-to-be, the state of chaos was already a mysterious veil to them. In other words, once a cultivator became a sage-to-be, they would also be able to sense the state of chaos. And everything inside heaven and earth, including the Great Way, was not a problem for cultivators who had reached the sage-to-be and above, except for some extremely special heaven and earth. Under such circumstances, in any heaven and earth, the existence that needed to surpass ordinary false saints to be able to see naturally could only be outside heaven and earth, in the state of chaos. Even if it was an existence like the origin of the realm, which was almost invisible, it was precisely because of this special characteristic of the origin of the realm that it was extremely difficult for Luo Fan to break through the barrier and enter it. At this moment, he was able to break through the barrier with his own comprehension and explore the origin of the realm. This obviously meant that he had already made great progress. After reaching his head into the origin of the realm, Luo Fan once again felt the great pressure that the origin of the realm brought him. In addition, when he looked at the grey mystery of the true saint around him, he had a clearer feeling than when he looked at it with Ho Hua's senses. In an instant, wisps of the mystery of the true saint naturally flowed into his heart and was naturally understood by him. The reason why Ho Hua's understanding of the origin of the realm was obviously deeper and more powerful than Luo Fan's, but Luo Fan's understanding of the origin of the realm with Ho Hua's senses was not as good as his own was also very simple. It was borrowed, after all, it was borrowed. It was like borrowing an iron hammer and training one's body to be as hard as steel. The latter was obviously the real powerful one. With such a huge change, how could Luo Fan still have the mood to care about the battle with Qiangua? Of course, he allowed his palm to naturally evolve all kinds of power, to resonate with the origin of the realm, and to continuously add the mysteries of the true divinity of the origin of the realm to his body to fight against Qiangua. Just as Luo Fan was using the power he had just obtained to fight Qiangua, in this world, Han Guzi and the others were in a dilemma. The strength of Qiangua and the others was too oppressive for them. It was so oppressive that they almost felt despair. However, they knew very well that if they really wanted to deal with them, what awaited them would definitely be falling into their hands without any resistance. However, they had worked so hard for such a long time. After plotting for so long to obtain the false saint status, they did not agree. Even though it had been proven that using the mystery of the true saint in this world to prove one's Tao and become a true saint, it was impossible for them to turn the false into the real. However, at this moment, the power brought about by proving one's Tao and becoming a saint through the mystery of the true saint and the various principles of the true saint stage surged in their hearts. It also made them believe that the longer they could maintain this state, the more benefits they could obtain. In the end, they might even find the way to turn the false into the real. The way to become a true saint, they had such hope. How could they be willing to give up this false saint status just like that? How could they give up just like that when they heard Luo Fan say that the other party was powerful? What do you guys think? Han Guzi sighed and asked the other false saint. Hearing his words, the other two false saints shook their heads. It was unknown whether they did not know what to do or if they did not agree to give up the false saint status. I believe you guys have seen how powerful they are. Han Guzi did not make any movements, nor did he point to the sky. However, all the false saints present knew that he was talking about those who were in despair. Even with the help of heaven and earth, we won't be their match. If it weren't for fellow Taoist Luo Fan protecting us, we might have already fallen into the enemy's hands and our false saint status would have been forcefully taken away. However, you guys know this as well. It's impossible for fellow Taoist Luo Fan to keep helping us. Furthermore, Hun Guzi did not continue, but everyone knew what he was going to say. Based on their previous understanding of Luo Fan would definitely not be a match for those in despair. Although they are powerful, however, the gap isn't so big that it can't be made up for. Perhaps, we can think of some ways to make up for this gap, a false saint said. However, he deduced the strength of those in despair based on the bet that Qiangua and the others had made against heaven and earth to determine their respective shares. The gap isn't impossible to make up for. The expressions of the other false saints changed slightly. Obviously, they all had the same thoughts as this false saint. After all, they had already relied on their mystical ability, the Long River, to last for such a long time. Although the gap was a little big, they were still at the same level. If they used some methods to close this gap, it did not seem impossible. At this moment, an inexplicable wave suddenly swept across this world, sweeping across the bodies of all the false saints present. Amidst this wave, all the false saints felt an indescribable fear. It was as if this wave was the gaze of some kind of natural enemy that was looking at them. An indescribable sense of danger suddenly surged up. At this moment, each of them felt as if their lives were about to be lost in the next moment. Their bodies seemed to be completely shattered in the next moment and eventually turned into nothingness. Upon discovering this, the bodies of Hun Guzi and the others trembled. With a thought, they instantly discovered the source of this wave, outside the world. When they saw the source of the wave clearly, all of them seemed to be dumbfounded. Everyone stood there in a daze, their eyes filled with disbelief. That was because they discovered that the aura of a true saint, which was so dense that it had turned into a substance, was being emitted from a sharp blade and a shield. Compared to the aura of a true saint, the true saint aura that so many of them had used the true saint mystical ability to trigger when they had opened up this world was extremely insignificant. Compared to the two, it was like comparing an ant to the entire earth. The disparity was so great that it made one feel despair. The reason why the shield suddenly erupted with such an aura was very simple. It was because opposite the shield and the sharp blade, there were two huge palms forming a seal, and with a power that could destroy everything, they slammed towards the shield. It was this almost absolute collision that caused the shield and the sharp blade to be unable to restrain their auras. Finally, their true power was revealed, and the mysteries of the true saint that they contained were finally revealed. This was why such a dense aura was revealed. This was why this inexplicable wave was produced, causing Hun Guzi and the others to wake up from their delusions. Chapter 1536. At this moment, Hun Guzi and the rest truly understood how huge the gap between them and those in despair was. This gap made them finally lose all hope of getting lucky. They understood that if they were to face them, they would only die. Although false saints had firm wills and could even be considered stubborn, they were not simple-minded existences after all. If there was a slim chance, they would use all their efforts to fight and risk their lives. However, if there wasn't even a 1 in a billion chance of success, they wouldn't insist on seeking death. Before this, they felt that they still had a slim chance of success when facing those in despair, so they still had the thought of giving it a try. But at this moment, everything that had happened in the outside world had shattered the slightest possibility for them, allowing them to finally understand the truth. Looks like we can only give up. Another false saint sighed. Give up. However, what else can we do if we give up? Another false saint said. To these false saints who were disciples of the sages, constructing this world and relying on the mysteries of the true saints in this world to prove their Tao and become sages was already their last attempt to turn the false into the real. If they gave up on this, what awaited them would obviously be endless despair. Hearing this, all the false saints present could not help but fall silent. They were different from Luofan. Every single one of them had become false saints for countless trillions of years. Everything about the false saint stage they had already completely enjoyed and experienced it. Now they wanted to obtain even the slightest bit of progress. They needed to spend countless years accumulating and enduring to be able to achieve it. It was also only at this moment in this world that they could feel the long-awaited feeling of their cultivation realm rapidly increasing, using the true saint mysteries as proof to become a false saint. It was also at this moment that they could barely see a trace of light in the originally dark and bright future of turning fake into reality. If they gave up on this and returned to that time, they could only rely on endless time to endure it. They were unwilling to live a life of hopeless fumbling in the boundless darkness. Thinking of the future, an inexplicable madness suddenly appeared in the depths of Hunguzi and the rest's eyes. "I feel that it's fine if we die," a false saint said in a somewhat hoarse voice. This kind of hoarseness, of course, was not his original voice, but because of the conflict in his heart. It affected his body, and naturally caused his voice to become like this. Hearing this, the other false sages trembled. They looked at each other and saw an indescribable madness and determination in each other's eyes. "It seems like compromising isn't in our character." Hunguzi sighed in the end. He had already made up his mind. After going through such a conflict, they had already made up their mind. Even if they were stubborn, they had to keep going. Even if he died, even if they were destroyed like this, they would not give up on their current false saint status. After making such a decision, they naturally didn't continue to wait here. Taking advantage of this opportunity to quickly increase his cultivation level, they each began to use their identities as false saints born from the world to adjust the flow of time in this world with their own strength. Soon, the time in the world had accelerated to an unimaginable speed. A single breath in the outside world was equivalent to billions of years in this world. Moreover, after reaching this step, they still didn't stop. They continued to accelerate the flow of time, still trying their best to make this gap bigger and bigger. This kind of situation was almost impossible in other worlds. In other worlds, even if it was a world that could give birth to false saints, there was a limit to the speed at which they could withstand the flow of time. There was also a limit to the limit of the speed at which they could accelerate the flow of time. Even with many false saints controlling and accelerating, they could only reach this level at most. The reason why this world could still continue to accelerate and improve after reaching this step was very simple. It was because this world was already fundamentally different from other worlds. In this part of the world, there were already true saint-level mysteries being born. Although there weren't many of these true saint-level mysteries, to this world, it had already improved the quality of this world. It caused the ability of this world to withstand the acceleration of the flow of time to increase by hundreds of millions of times, almost reaching an almost infinite level, accelerating the flow of time. At this moment, Luo Fan, who had focused his attention on the origin of the realm, sensed all of this. In an instant, he already knew the decision of Hunguzi and the others, and he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. They've actually decided to rather die than submit? It's up to you. He sighed and no longer cared about them. At this moment, the acceleration of the flow of time did not have much of an effect on him. After all, his mind was currently placed within the quintessence of his cultivation realm, and the flow of time here was independent of the heavens and the earth, and it existed independently of the world. No matter how fast the flow of time around his body accelerated or slowed down, the flow of time here would not change at all. It would not change at all. Therefore, at this moment, even if billions of years in this world were equivalent to a breath of time in the outside world, it did not affect him much. Looks like they really haven't given up. At this moment, Qiangua smiled at the other people in despair. Isn't that for sure? Isn't their mentality the same as ours in the past? If we encountered them in the past, would we have given up? Dao Shui said with a smile. They had completely grasped the mentality of Hun Guzi and the others. That was why they could calmly confront Luo Fan. They were not worried that Hun Guzi and the others would give up on the false saint godhood. They were not worried that Hun Guzi and the others would give up on the false saint godhood. From the looks of it, they clearly knew why Hun Guzi and the others had accelerated the flow of time. However, they weren't worried that Humuzi and the others would improve their cultivation to a level that could threaten them after such a long period of time. Accelerating the flow of time might be able to greatly improve one's cultivation realm. However, to truly improve to their level and become the current despair ones, it was not something that could be achieved by accelerating the flow of time. At this moment, Qianguo's sharp blade and shield were still clashing with Luo Fan's two palms. The layers of intense treasure light that came from it continued to spread throughout the universe. All of these vibrations caused the infinite spacetime in the infinite worlds to tremble. At this moment they all felt the terror of the tremors. Although Luo Fan's palms had more variations than the combination of the sharp blade and the shield, the true sage mysteries contained in his palms were still far from the combination of the sharp blade and the shield. Therefore, in this kind of battle, the two palms gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. The power of the shield and the sharp blade continued to shatter the two palms and continued to destroy them. If this continued, the destruction of the two palms was almost inevitable, even though time was slow. However, Luo Fan didn't care about this at all. Qianguo did not seem to be in a hurry. He appeared to be very interested and very calm. Looking at his appearance, it was clearly he did not use his full strength. As for the other despairing people, they just watched from the side. None of them made a move. "You guys are very noisy." At this moment, a voice came into the ears of all the despairing people present. It was a woman's voice. However, the voice contained boundless majesty. It had a shocking effect of crushing and overpowering everything. Hearing this voice, even Luo Fan instantly recovered from the state of breaking into the origin of the realm. Qianguo and the others instantly looked solemn. "Jin Emperor," Hohua said with a frown. "Of course it's me." The woman's voice was heard again. There was an inexplicable anger in the voice. It was like a person who was suddenly awakened from a deep sleep. The resentment in the voice was so strong that it turned into a substance. Suddenly, a figure appeared out of thin air in the void. She was a peerlessly beautiful woman, but there was a faintly discernible majesty lingering around her, making her look like a supreme emperor. After the woman appeared, her eyes suddenly lit up and she said, "It turns out that another world calamity has arrived. It seems that I woke up at the right time." "Jin Emperor, are you also interested in them?" Qianguo frowned and asked. "Of course I'm interested." The woman replied with a smile. "This person is stronger than Qianguo and the others." At this moment, Luo Fan had already made a judgment. This woman had only appeared here alone and did not bring along her world. However, the feeling that her entire body gave him was that she was stronger than Qianguo and the others, as well as their worlds. Facing Qianguo and the others, he still had the confidence to fight against them. He was confident that even if he failed, he could absolutely remain unscathed. However, facing this woman, who was the so-called Jin Emperor, he felt that he had no confidence that he could escape at all. This kind of strength made him extremely vigilant. In this universe, there is actually such a strong person. This was the only thought in his mind at this time. When he was in the demon realm, level 9 false saints and supreme venerables were already so powerful that he could not resist them. When he left the demon realm and entered the myriad realms, these people were like ants to him. However, the false saints had already replaced their positions and became undefeatable. After that, when he became a false saint himself and mastered the true divine ability, the false saints became ants again, existences that he could crush at will. However, at this time, another despair person appeared and replaced the original false saint's position. Now, he had stepped into the despair person level and was barely able to have the power to protect himself in front of the despair person. However, the sudden appearance of the Gene Emperor in front of him had smashed his confidence into pieces. There was simply no end to it. It was endless, and it suddenly made him feel a sense of exhaustion. Why is it so difficult to become a true divine? Since the Gene Emperor is interested, I'll withdraw. Then I'll quit, Qiangua said directly. As he said that, he simply waved his hand in the void. In an instant, the sharp blade and shield that he had sent out shook instantly and disappeared without a trace. He had easily escaped from the battle with the 2 palms that Luo Fan had sent out. This kind of control over the god's ability showed how casual he was in the battle with Luo Fan previously. Since Qiangua had given up, Luo Fan naturally could not be relentless with him. At this moment, he had an idea. He also dispersed the 2 palms. Although the power of these 2 palms was many times stronger than the true divine ability, for the current Luo Fan, it was just a matter of a thought to condense such palms. Whenever he wanted, how much he wanted, he could obtain them instantly. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no need to keep these 2 palms. It would be a waste of his energy and time. The other desperation men also said at this moment, I also give up. In the blink of an eye, the 6 desperation men had completely given up. However, this did not make Luo Fan happy at all. Instead, he raised his vigilance to the highest level. Although it was a good thing for them to give up, it also meant that the existence that would participate in the next battle would make them extremely afraid, so they had to give up. This, for Luo Fan, it was equivalent to driving away the wolf and entering the tiger. How could he be happy? Are you going to leave like this? The Gene Emperor suddenly said with a smile. His words made the expressions of all the desperation men change slightly. In Luo Fan's senses, there were even inexplicable fluctuations coming from the places where many of the despair warriors who hadn't come here were. It seemed that the Gene Emperor's words had shaken them and they could not control themselves. What's your plan, Gene Emperor? Dao Shui frowned at this moment. Although I am very interested in this world, but what I am more interested in is your world, the Gene Emperor said with a smile. Our world. Hearing this, Qiangua and the others' expressions became extremely ugly. At this moment, all of them finally understood why they had always felt that this world-ending tribulation would not end so easily and that they would not achieve their goal so easily. It turned out that they had also become a part of this world-ending tribulation. Moreover, it was not the kind of transcendental participation to seize the results of the world-ending tribulation, but to be seized as prey. Yes, I found that your world has been condensed very well. The occult of True Saint in it meets my requirements, so I plan to extract the occult of True Saint from your world to supplement my world. What do you think? The Gene Emperor said with a smile. Although her face was full of smiles and she looked lovely, at this moment, no one thought that she was beautiful or cute. Everyone just looked at her with vigilance. You can't blame me. Who told you to become a part of this world-ending tribulation? If you didn't participate in this world-ending tribulation, you wouldn't have touched any laws, and I wouldn't have attacked you for no reason, the Gene Emperor said with a smile. As she spoke, she raised her hand and grabbed towards Ho Hua's colossal world. Ho Hua's expression changed, and he said, I didn't participate in this world-ending tribulation. Why not? The world-ending tribulation on you is stronger than everyone else's, the Gene Emperor said indifferently. Hearing this, Ho Hua thought of how he had led Luo Fan to become a desperate person, and he suddenly felt a surge of regret. Helping the protagonist of the world-ending tribulation, this was actually the same as Qiangua and the others, participating in this world-ending tribulation. However, compared to Qiangua and the others, he was just standing on the other side, opposite to Qiangua and the others. The The circulation of karma, the transformation of luck, it's really mysterious and abstruse. At this moment, Ho-Hwa could only sigh with emotion. Just like that, Ho-Hwa had already started to take action. Although panic was extremely powerful, it didn't mean that he would give up resisting. At this moment, the colossal world where Ho-Hwa was located fluctuated rapidly, and a large number of true divine mysteries contained in the great Tao of the colossal world were instantly boiling. All kinds of mysterious combinations appeared in these true divine mysteries. In this combination, countless rays of light that contained the mysteries of the true sage gushed out from the sky. They were constantly evolving and changing in the void. In the blink of an eye, a boundless world was formed. It directly rushed towards the Jin Emperor. This world was extremely mysterious. Everything in it, even the tiniest speck of dust, was composed of true divine supernatural powers. These endless true divine supernatural powers didn't exist independently, but were combined together in an extremely mysterious and profound way, complementing each other's power. When two true divine supernatural powers were combined, their power would be hundreds or even thousands of times stronger than before. With the addition of another true divine supernatural power, it would be hundreds or even thousands of times stronger than before. With the addition of another true divine supernatural power, it would be hundreds or even thousands of times stronger than before, and so on and so forth. When these countless true divine supernatural powers were combined together, it wouldn't be difficult for them to destroy the entire world and the entire earth. Such a world formed by the true divine supernatural powers rushed towards the Jin Emperor at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it had already swallowed the power of the Jin Emperor's grasp. At this moment, an incredible impact broke out. At this moment, the world seemed to be filled with sand that was constantly shaking in a sealed bottle. It began to shake crazily. Compared to this kind of shaking strength, the shaking caused by the clash between Qian Guo and Luo Fan's power was simply like being fixed by the most solid object. The difference between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth. Just now, Qian Guo really used too much strength. At this moment, Luo Fan let out a sigh. He could already feel the power of the world formed by the combination of countless true divine supernatural powers just from the shaking. Ho-Hwa's strength was not much weaker than Qianguo's. What Ho-Hwa could do, Qianguo could also do the same. Just now, Qianguo didn't say that he used a similar method. Even if he used 1% of his power, the two palms that he sent out before would not have any resistance. They would definitely be completely shattered in an instant. Realizing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. I thought that I was already at the same level as the veteran Despoters, but now it seems that I was too arrogant. Luo Fan sighed. However, thinking about it at this time, it was also reasonable. Although he was now considered a Despoter, he could barely be considered to have stepped into the level of Qianguo and the others. However, not to mention the huge gap in the understanding of the origin of the realm, Qianguo and the others had the vast thousand world that they had condensed for countless years, while Luo Fan himself was alone. If there wasn't such a gap, it would be unreasonable. However, if I also condense the world that I created, I might be able to catch up with them soon. Such a thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about it, the other Despoters besides Ho-Hwa had already made their move. This time was different from when they attacked the world. Previously, when they attacked the world, it was equivalent to an adult attacking a child. Naturally, they would do whatever they wanted. But now, they were fighting for their own lives. They were fighting for the results of their countless years of hard work. How could they still stick to the principle of one-on-one like before? Naturally, they wanted to defeat the Jin Emperor by hook or by crook. This time, when they attacked, the momentum was also grand and vast. However, their attacks were not the same. Not all of them used true divine prowess to envelop the world to crush the opponent. Instead, Some relied on the endless true divine prowess to build some kind of magic weapon, some built figures, and some built parts of the body. All were different. However, no matter what form they built, or what form they used to carry the countless true divine prowess, the power of the means they displayed must be so powerful that it shocked Luo Fan. They must have reached the point where they could easily destroy the entire world, and even the earth and the universe. The appearance of these images caused the entire universe to tremble even more intensely. Chapter 1537. Just this instant of change had destroyed tens of millions of major kiliocosm, and billions of living beings had completely disappeared in the process. Qian Guo and the others' various means were indeed powerful beyond imagination. However, in the face of these powerful attacks, the Jin Emperor's expression didn't waver at all. She just raised her hand and pointed lightly. In an instant, 6 rays of light shot out from her hand and pounced towards Qian Guo and the others. They pounced towards the powerful attacks that the Jin Emperor had launched. Although they were just rays of light, Qian Guo and the others acted as if they were facing a great enemy. They focused all their attention on the rays of light and tried their best to control their attacks to collide with the rays of light. When the rays of light came into contact with the attacks, the vibration of the major kiliocosm became even more intense. Faintly, traces of strange cracks almost covered the entire area of nothingness that Luo Fan could sense. These strange cracks penetrated the nothingness and directly connected to the state of chaos, causing all that could be seen in the gale to be a gray state of chaos. Perhaps it was precisely because the impact was so strong that it directly shattered the nothingness that the destruction of the kiliocosm in the nothingness stopped. It made the seemingly unstoppable and almost long-windy literature learn to stop. Only when all the kiliocosm between the major kiliocosm in the heavens were completely destroyed could the destruction of the world destruction stop. That ray of light contained countless mysteries of the true sage, and the power it unleashed was enough to completely destroy any false sage. Even if a trace of it was leaked, it would be enough to completely destroy any false sage. It was even something that Hun Guzi and the others couldn't resist when they used the winding river. The attacks that Qian Guo and the others launched were not inferior to the mysteries of that ray of light. When the two collided, the changes that were displayed were extremely profound and unfathomable. Luo Fan, who was watching all of this from the side, secretly weighed it and found that even if he sent out his strongest karma net, it would probably not be able to last for a moment before it would be completely crushed by that ray of light or any other kind of attack. This knowledge caused Luo Fan's heart to involuntarily surge with an indescribable and complicated feeling. I still have a long way to go, he thought to himself. Then, he began to put all his attention into comprehending the mysteries of the true divine stage that were revealed in the battle. He was now in despair. He could already probe his head into the origin of the realm. It was much easier to comprehend the profound mysteries of true divine than before. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no obstacle for him to comprehend the mysteries of the true sage that had appeared in front of him at this moment. Very soon, he was on the right track. All the changes in the outside world, it gradually left his senses. Although his current body was at that time, the speed of the flow of light had been accelerated to an unbelievable level. Compared to the flow of time in the outside world, it had almost reached the limit of numbers. However, he was already a false sage. At this moment, he placed all his attention on the battle that was happening outside the world that was beyond the imagination of all false sages. The changes in the flow of time around his body naturally did not linger in his heart at all. In other words, even if a breath outside the world was billions of years long compared to the spacetime he was in, it was just a breath to him. In other words, although he was outside the world, his mind was not affected by the flow of time in the world. In that world, Luo Fan did not care about all the changes in the world, nor did he place his senses in it. However, the changes in the world would not stop developing because of him. After a few dozen breaths, this world had developed for an unknown number of trillions of years. The entire barren world had completely changed. At this moment, the boundless world was already full of vitality, and the number of living beings in it had also exceeded the limit of numbers. As for the powerful cultivation civilization, there was naturally no lack of them. In this world, Hunguzi and the others were no longer the only false sages. In fact, after billions of years of development, more than 200 false sages had been born in this world. These 200 false sages did not rely on the mysteries of true sages to prove their Tao and become sages. Instead, they relied on the countless mysteries of false sages in this world to prove their Tao and become sages. However, even so, due to the power of this world, these false sages were already thousands of times stronger than ordinary false sages when they were born. In fact, because the great Tao of this world was so vast and boundless, the false sage theurgy that they comprehended by relying on the great Tao of this world vaguely had the hint of a true sage theurgy. Once it was released, although it wouldn't be able to have endless changes and evolution potential like a true sage's remarkable ability, it would still be able to have 1% of its effect. In a battle, it would be able to crush other pseudo-sages or even kill them instantly. Such powerful false sages did not have much status in this world. At the very least, Hunguzi and the others were in an extremely transcendent position above them. It could almost be said that all other false sages were like disciples and subordinates before them. Hunguzi and the others resided in the depths of the law layer. In other words, they were the closest to the great Tao of this world. The reason why they were here was very simple. It was because they needed to take advantage of this period of time to increase their strength as much as possible, comprehend the great Tao as much as possible, and have the strength to resist those in despair. Apart from the 10 of them, the other false sages were like ordinary cultivators. They directly occupied areas in this world, which was the vast and boundless continent, and established their own sections, imparting Tao to all living beings. It was also because they established sects and imparted Tao to all living beings that the cultivation civilization in this world was extremely prosperous. The number of supreme supremacies and level 9 false sages that were born was almost thousands of times more than other worlds that could give birth to false sages. The number of other false sages was only multiplied, however, even though there were so many pseudo-saints. The vastness of this world was still many times greater than other worlds. Therefore, there were so many false sages and cultivators in this world. However, it did not make this world seem too crowded. To many cultivators, this world was still vast and boundless. It was still enough for them to continue exploring it for endless years, where Luo Fan was. This was because he was the furthest away from Hunguzi and the others. Therefore, at this moment, it was also at the end of this world, and it was also a place that the living beings in this world had yet to develop. Moreover, because Luo Fan was a despairing sage, there was a strange fluctuation around his body. An inexplicable wave naturally lingered around his body. Although he did not hide his body at all, no one could see his existence other than the false saint. In fact, apart from Hunguzi and the others who knew Luo Fan, the other newly born false sages couldn't even see his appearance clearly, although it had only been a few breaths for Luo Fan. To this world, he had been standing in this position for billions of years. Unknowingly, he had already become a scenery and a characteristic of this world. It was even to the extent that there were some extraordinary cultivators in the cultivation world of the heavens and the earth that were able to sense Luo Fan's location from afar and sense his state to comprehend some sort of peerlessly exquisite cultivation technique. From this, they slightly borrowed a trace of the profundities of Luo Fan's body and stepped onto the path of cultivation. Among them, there were even supreme supremacies born on this day. In the deepest part of the law layer, in a mysterious place, a voice rang out, "Are you really not willing to prove your Tao and become sages in this world?" Due to the existence of Hunguzi and the others, cave dwellings had long been built in this location. These caves were faintly discernible and indistinct, and they were arranged in a row in the depths of the laws. They formed a strange and mysterious group of buildings. Hunguzi and the others were currently in this building complex, each in their own cave dwellings. The person who spoke at this time was Hunguzi. He wasn't talking to anyone else, but Jing Yitzi and the others. At this moment, Jing Yitzi and the others were standing in front of Hunguzi's cave dwelling, looking at the boundless world from afar and carefully savoring the various activities of the countless living beings in this world. Jing Yitzi laughed when he heard Hunguzi's words. If we wanted to prove our Tao and become sages here, wouldn't we have done it back then? Why would we have waited until now? The situation back then is completely different from the current situation. Hunguzi smiled. After countless trillions of years of cultivation, his cultivation realm had improved a lot compared to before. He even had the ability to control the true divine theurgy at will like Luo Fan did. He could even make the true divine theurgy leave the battlefield where it was fighting against other true divine theurgy. He could even preserve it after the battle and not dissipate because it left the battlefield. In other words, at this moment, their strength was already comparable to Luo Fan, who had yet to become a despair person. This kind of strength was almost unimaginable to them in the past. However, they still didn't feel happy even with this kind of strength. This was because even this kind of strength was insignificant compared to the danger they were currently facing. It was still not enough for them to pass through safely. What's the difference? It's all useless. None of them can help me achieve my goal. Jing Yitzi smiled. It seems like I can't change your mind. Hunguzi sighed. Suddenly, Hunguzi's expression changed slightly. At this moment, Jing Yitzi's expression also changed slightly. It seems that our strength has indeed widened to an unimaginable level. As they spoke, the false sages moved their hearts and arrived at the center of the 10 cave abodes. There was nothing else here. There was only a strange great thousand world here. However, this great thousand world was different from other great thousand world. This great thousand world was already connected to the entire heaven and earth. Whether it was the stability of space, the stability of time, the complexity of laws, or even the great Tao, it was the same as this heaven and earth. Or, to be more specific, it was actually replaced by this heaven and earth. This special characteristic of the great thousand world made this heaven and earth many times stronger. However, similarly, it was also because of this change that this heaven and earth could never move and could never leave this heaven and earth. At this moment in this heaven and earth, there were thousands of true saint spirit abilities that were engaged in a chaotic battle. These were true saint spirit abilities, not others. They were all the true saint spirit abilities that Jing Yitzi and the others had mastered. Of course, these true saint spirit abilities were repeated. Hunguzi and the others were true saint disciples. Even if they had been imparted many cultivation principles by true saints, it was impossible for them to master thousands of true saint spirit abilities. As expected, all of my true saint spirit abilities have been crushed. It seems that I can't help you guys anymore, Jing Yitzi said to Hunguzi with a smile. As they spoke, the last true saint spirit ability that carried Jing Yitzi's aura was crushed by another powerful true saint spirit ability and turned into nothingness. At this moment, the other false sages also had a faint look of regret on their faces. Obviously, their true sage mystiques had completely disappeared at this moment. In an instant, the true saint spirit abilities that originally had thousands of true saint spirit abilities were reduced by nearly 1/10. Everything that happened here was actually not difficult to understand. This was because Hunguzi and the others had already obtained the ability to preserve the true saint spirit abilities after a battle after countless trillions of years of cultivation. Therefore, in order to allow them to resist the powerful existence of unknown origin in the future, they thought of a way. that was to use all of their efforts to nurture every true saint spirit ability that they possessed. In other words, to let their true saint spirit abilities be in a state of battle at all times, so that all of their potential could be stimulated as much as possible, so that the power of the true saint spirit abilities would become stronger and stronger. This was similar to the karma web that Luo Fan had nurtured back then. As for the true saint spirit abilities that might fail in the end and be unable to fight for a long time, the problem of not being able to stimulate their potential for a long time was even simpler. True saint spirit abilities were existences with extremely high intelligence. They could attack from afar, ally with the weak to resist the strong, and so on and so forth. It could almost be said that when the number of true saint spirit abilities increased to more than 3, then the battle between true saint spirit abilities would continue for an extremely long time. It might take thousands of years, or even tens of millions of years for the final result to appear. When the number of true saint spirit abilities increased to thousands, due to the changes becoming more complicated, the time that the battle could last would become longer. It was precisely because of this that Hun Guzi and the others didn't send each of their true saint spirit abilities into that world. Instead, they directly sent thousands of true saint spirit abilities into that world. From this point of view, the effect of this method was remarkable. At this moment, in that world, the true saint spirit abilities of Hun Guzi and the others were already tens of thousands of times stronger than when they were first formed. It could be said that if any of their true saint spirit abilities were used now, they would be able to instantly kill their previous true saint spirit abilities. As for why Jing Yitzi and the others' true saint spirit abilities were completely wiped out at this time, the reason wasn't complicated. It was because their true saint spirit abilities were added later. Because the time to stimulate their potential was relatively short, their power was naturally weaker than other true saint spirit abilities. In the end, they finally couldn't withstand the changes and impact between the thousands of true saint spirit abilities, so they were directly crushed. At this moment, apart from Hun Guzi, the other 9 false saints who achieved the Tao with the true saint spirit ability appeared at the same time. After seeing the scene in that world, they all sighed. Of course, it wasn't because they felt that Jing Yitzi and the others were too weak, but because they knew that the evolution of these true saint spirit abilities might slow down. Although the potential of any 2 true sage theurgy would naturally be stimulated as long as they continued to fight, the power of the theurgy would naturally be continuously stimulated. But, if the stimulation was monotonous, the evolution speed would become extremely slow. Now, if these true saint spirit abilities lost the stimulation of Jing Yitzi and the others' true saint spirit abilities, they would obviously fall into a monotonous state by themselves. I still have to thank all of you for your help. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid these spirit abilities would have taken tens of millions of years to reach this stage, Hun Guzi said to Jing Yitzi with a smile. Jing Yitzi only smiled and said, "It's just tens of millions of years. For you guys now. Isn't time the most important thing?" "It's us," Hun Guzi said with a smile. Jing Yitzi had a faint smile on his face, but he didn't say anything else. At this moment, another false saint said, "You guys said that you guys can already control these spirit abilities like Taoist Luo Fan. I wonder if you guys can show us?" Upon hearing this, Hun Guzi immediately nodded. To him, it was just a small matter. Naturally, he wouldn't decline. He smiled faintly and raised his hand. A mirror-like true saint spirit ability left the battlefield, rushed out of that world, and landed in his hand. The entire process was as natural and smooth as flowing water. Because of this, the numerous true divine mystiques in that world changed, but none of the true divine mystiques chased after him relentlessly. It felt as though they were not true divine sacred powers, but just ordinary objects. After the mirror-like true saint spirit ability fell into Hun Guzi's hand, it stayed there quietly. It looked like an ordinary copper mirror, and could even reflect the scene outside. Hun Guzi played with the true saint spirit ability for a while and casually threw it out. The mirror suddenly enlarged by many times and reached the effect of almost filling up the world. At this moment, all the living beings and cultivators in this world suddenly felt an indescribable sense of danger. This kind of crisis felt like an unimaginable and terrifying attack was about to befall them in the next moment, completely erasing everything they had. Among them was the false saint who had made Hun Guzi display his strength earlier. Hun Guzi didn't want to destroy this world, so he naturally wouldn't completely release the true saint's spirit ability at this moment. At this moment, after letting the false saint feel the power of the true saint's spirit ability, he naturally put it away. In the blink of an eye, it turned back into the copper mirror in his hand. Subsequently, he didn't hesitate and casually sent the copper mirror back into that world, back into the battle with the thousands of true saint spirit abilities that would last for countless years. I wonder if you've sensed it clearly? Hun Guzi asked with a smile. The false saint smiled bitterly and said, "Of course I've sensed it clearly. I didn't expect it to be so powerful. It seems like I've already become an ant in front of all of you." However, Hun Guzi didn't reply. This was the truth, and it would be meaningless to deny it. However, if he directly admitted it, it would be too disrespectful to them, and it wouldn't be appropriate either. Therefore, he decided to keep his mouth shut. At this moment, another false saint who had become a true saint with the true saint's spirit ability asked, "Fellow Taoists, are you interested in proving your Tao in this world? If you're interested, we can open up all the false saint spirit ability in this world that's close to the true saint spirit ability for you to choose." The true saint spirit ability in this world was condensed and sublimated from the false saint spirit ability, so it was naturally impossible for the false saint spirit ability to be followed by the true saint spirit ability. There was no intermediate process. In fact, there were still many transitional abilities between the false saint spirit ability and the true saint spirit ability. These abilities belonged to the false saint spirit ability, but they vaguely had some characteristics of the true saint spirit ability. Compared to the true saint spirit ability, it was naturally much weaker, but compared to the false saint spirit ability, it was much stronger. If Jing Yizhi and the others were willing to use these abilities to prove their Tao and become false saints, the power of their abilities would definitely increase by many times. Forget it. The false saint who had asked Hun Guzi to display his abilities smiled faintly. Although his personality wasn't as strange as Jing Yizhi's, he had given up the opportunity to prove his Tao and become a true saint from the very beginning. Now that he was facing a true saint spirit ability that wasn't even a true saint spirit ability, how could he be tempted? Chapter 1538. I wonder how long fellow Taoist Luo Fan can last. Suddenly, the fake saint said. No matter how long it takes, it's still a huge favor to us. Hun Guzi sighed. At this moment, his emotions were rather complicated. When Ning Qing first met Luo Fan, he only regarded Luo Fan as a cultivator with a few tricks up his sleeve. He even looked down on Luo Fan. However, unknowingly, Luo Fan had become a false sage and grasped a true sage mystical ability. Now, he had already grown to the point where all of them combined could not withstand a single thought of his. Even though he was a false sage and a disciple of a true sage, his emotions were a little complicated. Ever since they had accelerated the flow of time in this world to a level that was almost at its limit, their connection with the outside world had been completely cut off. Therefore, at this moment, none of them knew that the Jin Emperor, who was so powerful, had appeared. They didn't know that Luo Fan didn't have the strength to protect them at this moment. If the Jin Emperor hadn't targeted those in despair, their world would have been completely destroyed in the process. Their fake sage status would have been extracted, and they could do whatever they wanted. Of course, it made no difference to them whether they knew or not. No matter if it was the Jin Emperor or the other scholars, or Qian Guo and the others in despair, to them, they were all existences that could not be resisted. No matter which one they faced, the result would not change. The many false sages stayed here for a while. Then, they went their separate ways. For Hun Guzi and the others, the most important thing right now was to cultivate. They had to work hard to improve their cultivation in order to obtain that 1 in a billion chance of becoming a true saint. At the very least, they had to reach the level of those in despair. As for Jing Yitzi and the others, enjoying the endless years of happiness in this world was what they needed to do. No matter which side they were on, staying here was not their goal. As for that world, it was a battle between true sages. It was still brilliant and varied, and all sorts of schemes were displayed vividly and vividly. During this process, the potential of each true divine ability was constantly stimulated, and its power became stronger and stronger. It was getting more and more terrifying. And so on and so forth. Every true divine ability would be enhanced to an unbelievable level. Time passed slowly. In this world, billions of trillions of years had passed unknowingly. After an unknown number of billions of trillion years, the number of false sages in this world. Instead, it rose again, from the original 200 to 300. Because of this change, the power of the entire world had increased by countless times. After billions of years of evolution, the cultivation civilization in this world had been destroyed and reborn countless times. There was a world of difference between the current cultivation civilization and the one in the past. In the current world, the cultivation system that many cultivators had comprehended based on an existence that seemed to be eternally immovable and indestructible, yet contained endless mysteries that were vaguely nobler, more mysterious, and more profound than the sages had become a great cultivation school in the world. The cultivation system of this cultivation school was all-encompassing. There were all sorts of cultivation methods, all sorts of paths, and all sorts of achievements were included in it. For billions of years, the strongest cultivators of the cultivation system had already reached the level of false sages. That's right, there were already cultivators who had comprehended the cultivation method according to that eternal existence. They had successfully proven their Tao in this world and became false sages. In fact, cultivators who became false sages according to this method would naturally be able to grasp a divine power that was similar to the true sage divine power after they succeeded without the need to cultivate. The power of this kind of ability surpassed that of the false sages in this world. Compared to the false sages in other worlds, it was countless times stronger. Even if it couldn't be compared to the true divine ability, it could still be almost invincible among the false sages. It was precisely because this cultivation system had such a future that it could actually allow cultivators to successfully prove their Tao and become false sages that were countless times stronger than other false sages. That was why this cultivation system was so popular and developed to its current level. Otherwise, how could a cultivation system that relied on some kind of miracle in this world really become popular? That strange existence that was almost eternally motionless and indestructible was obviously Luo Fan. He stood there and his mind was locked onto the battle between Emperor Jin and Qian Guo outside the world. However, he was completely free from the influence of the flow of time in this world. No matter how much time had passed in this world, be it billions of years or immeasurable years, it was just a matter of a few breaths to him. Therefore, although the increase of false sages in this world was extremely slow in the past billions of years, there would only be one increase every billions of years. However, in the blink of an eye, he felt that there were already more than 10 mysterious existences that had formed a strange connection with him. This connection suddenly made him break free from the state of mind that was immersed in the battle between Emperor Jin and Qian Guo. No matter what kind of opportunity was ahead, no matter how rare and precious it was secondary to him. And now, for Luo Fan, there was suddenly a strange existence that was connected to him. This abnormal change was enough to suppress everything and make him come back to his senses. After all, as a person who was already in despair, his control over his body had already reached a level that could not be improved. Under such circumstances, an unexpected change suddenly occurred in his body. Suddenly, this change that was out of his control occurred. No matter what, this was something he could not accept. For this, he obviously needed to eliminate this feeling of being out of control as much as possible. In other words, he had to first understand what was going on. When he broke free from that kind of immersion, his mind instantly synchronized with the flow of time in this world. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they would definitely not be able to withstand such a sudden change in the flow of time. Their mind would definitely collapse in an instant and they would not be able to control their own power. They would directly explode. Their bodies would die and their souls would scatter. However, for Luo Fan, who was already in despair, this was not a problem at all. His mind, his body, he was able to adapt to everything extremely naturally. At this time, even if the change in the flow of time was so huge, he could still safely accept it. He did not even feel the slightest bit of discomfort. His mind returned to this world, and in an instant, endless joy surged into his heart. He was one of the founders of this world, and had extremely high authority in this world. Moreover, he was already in despair. He was omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. That was only the most basic. It was just his ability. Therefore, in the blink of an eye, he instantly knew and grasped the billions of trillions of years of history since the birth of this world. It was so detailed that it was as if he had participated in everything that had happened here over the countless years, and had experienced all the historical junctures. I see. In an instant, he already knew why there was such an inexplicable connection with him. For a moment, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. I didn't expect that just my figure standing here would create so many false saints. He sighed to himself. At this moment, he looked up and the dozen or so false saints who had established sects all over the world through comprehending his mysteries appeared in his mind. Because these false saints had an inexplicable connection with him, it was extremely easy for him to sense them, and it was also extremely obscure. With just a thought, he had already understood everything about them. Thoughts swirled in his mind. After some research, he finally understood how these connections would affect him. The existence of these false saints did not bring any harm to Luo Fan at all. In fact, they even brought great benefits. No matter how a false saint became a false saint, he was definitely not an ordinary person. He was definitely a genius. Therefore, Luo Fan had never underestimated the intelligence of any false saint. Even if it was a false saint who comprehended the great Tao using Luo Fan's figure and appearance, it was the same. For Luo Fan, the existence of these false sages was equivalent to an additional connection to the great Tao. The mysteries of the great Tao that they had comprehended, the mysteries of the true sage, and the mysteries of the false sage that they had comprehended were all for him to know and receive. In other words, every additional false saint was equivalent to an additional false saint's wisdom to help him cultivate, help him comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao, and comprehend the mysteries of the true saint. Although it wasn't a clone, it wasn't much different from a clone. Upon discovering this, Luo Fan was secretly delighted. With a slight thought, he connected his mind to the origin of the realm and slowly changed his aura and the mysteries that he displayed. More and more mysteries of the true saint were drawn out and added to the origin of the realm. With this change, his figure looked more and more mysterious, profound, and unbelievable. With this change, countless cultivators in this world who happened to be watching him from afar were enlightened and directly started cultivating the cultivation system that was derived from him. In fact, even in this world, the false sage who had cultivated this cultivation system and achieved Tao suddenly realized that he was different. He seemed to have realized something, as if he had found a direction to move forward that he could not find at all in the past. For a moment, countless inspirations and thoughts flashed through their minds, causing them to almost instantly enter a state of cultivation comprehension. Sensing all these changes, Luo Fan was secretly satisfied. If this continued, there would definitely be more and more false saints in this world who used him as the source. Moreover, the power of the false saints who eventually succeeded would also become stronger and stronger. In fact, there might even be some false saints who could research a mystique that was infinitely close to a true saint's mystique one day. This would directly shorten the distance between them and the false saints who were disciples of true saints. After such a change, their understanding of the great Tao and the mysteries of true divinity would be transmitted to Luo Fan's heart more and more, and he would be able to grasp them. Fellow Taoist, you're scheming. At this moment, Hun Guzi's voice rang in Luo Fan's ears. As he spoke, Hun Guzi's figure gradually appeared in front of him with an inexplicable smile on his face. Luo Fan smiled when he saw Hun Guzi, but he was not surprised by his words at all. His plans could be hidden from the false saints who were born and raised in this world. However, they definitely could not be hidden from a true saint like Hun Guzi. Hun Guzi could tell. That was to be expected, so why should he be surprised? It's just some plans. Luo Fan smiled faintly. However, aren't you afraid that you won't be able to escape? Hun Guzi asked helplessly. Now that Luo Fan had added more mysteries of the true saint to him, this would definitely cause more and more false saints in this world to use him as the source. Moreover, they would become stronger and stronger. Although he did not know what Luo Fan's ultimate goal was, he understood. If this continued, there would not be any problems in the short term, but if it were to take a long time, when the number of false saints increased to a certain level, when the strength of those false saints also increased to a certain level, they would definitely turn the tables and deal with Luo Fan to prevent Luo Fan from affecting them. When Luo Fan heard this, he smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you're still looking at me the same way you used to." Hearing this, Hun Guzi shook his head helplessly. He knew that he could not persuade him anymore. The confidence in Luo Fan's words was already so strong that it was a little dazzling. If he continued to persuade Luo Fan, it would mean that Luo Fan did not believe in his strength. This was something that would offend someone. Why would he do it if it was not necessary? Therefore, he did not continue this topic. Instead, he asked, "Fellow Taoist, weren't you fighting with those mysterious people? Why have you come to this world now? Could it be that those mysterious people have been defeated and chased away by you?" At this point, even though Hun Guzi was a false saint under a true saint and had earth-shattering strength, he could not help but feel a little excited. Although the possibility of this was almost zero, if it was true, it meant that they were completely out of danger. How could he be indifferent? When Luo Fan heard this, he shook his head and said, "Of course not. With my strength, it's already rare for me to be able to hold on for a while. How could I possibly chase them away? The reason why I had the time to come back this time was firstly because that battle was no longer something that I could participate in. Secondly, it was because of the changes in this world." The battle has leveled up? Hun Guzi had a look of disbelief on his face. Back then, when they had not teleported or accelerated the flow of time, the level of the battle that was going on outside the world was already unimaginably high. In fact, it had already made them feel despair. Could it be that such a battle could actually level up again? At this moment, the first thought that came to his mind was that it was impossible. The next thought that came to his mind was the same as when Luo Fan first saw the Jin Emperor. He suddenly felt that he did not recognize this world and this world. The reason why he suppressed this impossible thought without asking was because he knew that there was no reason for Luo Fan to lie to him. Since Luo Fan said that the battle had leveled up, then it had naturally leveled up. Naturally, Luo Fan knew the shock in Hun Guzi's heart. Without beating around the bush, he nodded and said, "That's right. Those mysterious enemies from before called themselves the Hopeless Ones. They were very powerful, and any one of them could crush the combined strength of all false saints, regardless of whether they had the true saint divine ability or not. Although I'm not confident that I can defeat them, I'm confident that I can hold on for a while. However, before that, another enemy suddenly appeared. Luo Fan faintly explained the battle that had happened outside the world and Hun Guzi. However, Hun Guzi's expression instantly froze. Jean Emperor Desperator. Below the true saint, there are actually such powerful existences. After a while, he murmured. Seeing him like this, Luo Fan sighed and said no more. It took some time for Hun Guzi to regain his composure. He smiled wryly and said, I've made fellow Taoists laugh. Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, What a joke. When I first learned about it, I was about the same as you. However, what do you intend to do now? I think the Jean Emperor is quite domineering. Although he mostly targets the desperate ones, I don't think he's a good person. However, I'm afraid they won't let you off either. Hunguzi sighed when he heard this and said, What else can we do? Counter soldiers with arms and water with an earth weir. Just go back to how you were before. Is that so? If it was before, you might have had a 1 in a billion chance of keeping your fake saint status, but now this chance has been reduced by 1 billion times. It was almost impossible. I advise all of you to give up on the false sainthood. After all, you are all disciples of a true sage. Your backing is firm and sturdy. I don't think the Jean Emperor will kill all of you, Luo Fan said faintly. Hun Guzi laughed when he heard this. Fellow Taoists' consideration is reasonable. It's just that we've been cultivating for so long. Billions of trillions of years had already passed. Adding on the time we have shifted. During this period of time, it will increase tenfold. 100 times. After such a long time, even if our hearts of longevity are firm and unshakable, we are already close to our limit. In any case, we've already enjoyed what we wanted to enjoy, and we've endured what we wanted to endure. Right now, our only obsession is to become a true sage. Although the chances are extremely small, we are willing to use our lives to fight for it. Hearing this, how could Luo Fan say anything else? He could only sigh helplessly. Then I wish all of you good luck. At this moment, the remaining 9 false sages in this world who had used the mysteries of true sages to become saints appeared in front of Luo Fan. They bowed to Luo Fan and said, Thank you for protecting us in front of that despair, Tao friend. Luo Fan smiled when he heard this. I'm just helping myself. Why are you being so polite? No matter what, if we are lucky to survive this time, we will definitely thank you in the future, Hun Guzi said solemnly. Luo Fan naturally did not care about their gratitude. He was already a despairing saint now. In the long time to come, he would be able to easily comprehend more and more mysteries of true sage through the origin of his realm, allowing his cultivation base to improve rapidly. In this way, why would he care about the gratitude of Hun Guzi and the others? Just as he was about to shut his mouth, he suddenly thought of something and asked, Fellow Taoists, may I know what your plans are for the false saints born in this world? When Hun Guzi and the others heard this, they vaguely understood what Luo Fan meant. Therefore, they all smiled and said, We don't have any plans. If you have any plans, feel free to do so. Luo Fan didn't stand on ceremony and immediately said, Since that's the case, I'll have to ask all of you to help me. Hun Guzi and the others were all false saints, so they were extremely clear about Luo Fan's previous actions and even his vague intentions. Although Luo Fan did not say it clearly, they completely understood what he meant. They all smiled and said, Don't worry, just leave it to us. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and thanked Hun Guzi and the others. Hun Guzi and the others did not stay here. After agreeing to Luo Fan's request, they left separately. In the blink of an eye, only Luo Fan was left here. After the others left, Luo Fan did not continue to stay in this super-fast flow of time. He gradually raised his mind and shifted his attention to the outside world, to the battle between Emperor Jin and Qian Guo. Although he had conversed with Hun Guzi and the others in this world for a long time, only less than 1/1000th of an instant had passed in the outside world due to the difference in the flow of time. The situation in the outside world was not much different from before, and he did not miss many profound changes in the battle. Only Luo Fan, who was one of the pioneers of this world and also a powerful despair cultivator, could still easily let his mind enter and exit this world when the difference in the flow of time between this world and the outside world was so great, and he could freely switch between the two different flows of time. As soon as his mind was pulled out, in just a few short breaths, he felt that the existence in the world that had an inexplicable connection with him, which was the number of false saints who had succeeded in proving their Tao with him as the source, had suddenly increased. Chapter 1539. Fawn color equals red, squinting eyes face B. At this moment, he had this feeling because he was in that world. In the few breaths of time that Hun Guzi and the others had been in the outside world, which was also billions of trillion years in that world, they had already helped him cultivate dozens of false sages. That was right. This was what Luo Fan had asked Hun Guzi and the others for help previously. Since the false sages who used him as the source could bring him benefits, Luo Fan naturally wanted to increase the number of false sages. Therefore, what he had asked Hun Guzi and the others to do was to help him cultivate more false sages who used him as the source in that world. Although there were already many false sages who used Luo Fan as the source in that world, and they were also preaching to the entire world about how to cultivate this cultivation system to become a sage, how could their understanding of Luo Fan be compared to Hun Guzi and the others? In comparison, as long as Hun Guzi and the others had the intention to cultivate cultivators to walk this path, the effect would be at least 100 times better than those false sages. Obviously, Hun Guzi and the others also understood Luo Fan's intentions. After Luo Fan left, they began to work hard to cultivate more cultivators, working hard to let more and more cultivators walk this path. This was the cultivation system that appeared in this world with Luo Fan as the source. At this moment, with the addition of so many false sages who were connected to him, Luo Fan suddenly felt countless true sage mysteries flowing through his heart. As these true sage mysteries flowed through, he felt the repulsive force of the origin of the realm suddenly lessen. He struggled slightly. However, he had already broken through the barrier, and his entire upper body broke into the origin of the realm, allowing him to once again enjoy the powerful pressure that he felt when he broke into the origin of the realm with the help of the Ho Hua's senses. This allowed him to truly confirm that his plan could succeed. Using the wisdom of many false sages to help Wu comprehend the mysteries of the true sage is indeed the right step, Luo Fan thought to himself with a smile. The force from before was none other than the newly born pseudo-sage's comprehension of the true sage mysteries. Although these comprehensions were the comprehensions of others, not all of them could be absorbed by Luo Fan. It couldn't be completely used by him. However, those false sages used Luo Fan as the source to cultivate them. The profound mysteries of the true saint that they had comprehended were also the profound mysteries of the true saint that Luo Fan had added to himself. If Luo Fan wanted to convert it into his own comprehension, it would be many times easier than converting the comprehension of other false saints. In the blink of an eye, he had completely transferred and absorbed all of these comprehensions. If either of these two conditions were not met, even if Luo Fan could easily obtain their comprehension, he would definitely not be able to obtain such great benefits. Sensing this benefit, Luo Fan naturally did not hesitate anymore. He immediately began to work hard to continuously guide and load the profound mysteries of the true sage that he had come into contact with in the origin of the realm onto his own body, allowing his body to carry more and more profound mysteries of the true sage in the process. This also allowed the false sages in the world and the cultivators in the world to have more goals to comprehend. This made the cultivation system that used Luo Fan as the source become more and more prosperous. It also became more and more popular. The prosperity and popularity brought about more and more false sages that met Luo Fan's requirements, The increase in the number of false sages naturally allowed Luo Fan to obtain more and more comprehension of the profound mysteries of the true sage, which then turned into a force. This allowed his body to enter the origin of the realm more and more. However, although he was constantly improving, it had already become a norm. It was not as shocking as the first time it appeared, and the effect was not as obvious. Therefore, after hundreds of breaths, when the number of false sages with Luo Fan as the source had increased to thousands, Luo Fan barely sent his entire body into the origin of the realm. He truly felt the terrifying pressure that the endless profound mysteries of the true sage in the origin of the realm brought him. Of course, compared to entering the origin of the realm with the help of Ho Hua's senses, at this moment, Luo Fan felt that the pressure of the origin of the realm seemed to be much smaller. Moreover, the entire origin of the realm gave him a feeling of vastness. At the same time, the distance between him and the origin of the realm had also become closer. All of this clearly showed that at this moment, he was even more powerful than when he had stepped into the origin of the realm with the help of Ho Hua. When his entire body stepped into the origin of the realm, the Jin Emperor and the others couldn't help but look at him even in the midst of a battle. I didn't expect him to really step into this level. This speed of improvement is really terrifying. Ho Hua, who knew Luo Fan the most, was shocked at this moment. It should be known that from the moment he sensed the origin of the realm to the moment his entire body entered the origin of the realm, he was able to guide the true divine mysteries in the origin of the realm at any time and place. He was even able to unleash power that surpassed the true divine powers without using fixed true divine powers. However, it took him billions of years. However, at this moment, the person in front of him had actually completed this process in such a short period of time. This was obviously unimaginable to him, so how could he not be shocked? He's indeed a good seedling. Unfortunately, it's too late. He hasn't established his own world at this time, so it's useless to me, the Jin Emperor thought to himself. With this thought in mind, he couldn't be bothered to pay attention to Luo Fan anymore. Instead, he turned his attention back to the 7 Desperators in front of him. Although she was much stronger than the Despair Man, but because the Despair Man was too strong, even she would not be able to bear the consequences if she was careless and was attacked by him. Therefore, he had no choice but to treat the battle with the 7 Despair Men seriously. Luo Fan naturally noticed the attention of the Desperators and the Jin Emperor. In his heart, he was a little nervous. When they finally retracted their gazes, he heaved a sigh of relief. The difference in power would naturally cause a change in mood. Even if it was Luo Fan, when faced with an irresistible power, it was difficult for him to be as carefree as usual. At this moment, it had been a few breaths of time since he had truly stepped into the origin of the realm. During this period of time, there were also many false saints that were born with him as the source of cultivation. However, the benefits brought to him by the birth of these false saints were no longer as great as before. Although he could still comprehend some of the mysteries of the true saint from time to time, it made him feel that his understanding of the mysteries of the true saint had become deeper. However, it was only limited to this category. For him, it was no longer possible for him to see his progress in the origin of the realm every moment like before. Even the terrifying pressure brought by the origin of the realm around him didn't seem to weaken at all. It was just like how the comprehension of the mysteries of the true saint by those false saints was too flawed for him. It wasn't enough for him to gain much. Although Luo Fan was a little disappointed to discover this, it wasn't that he couldn't understand it. It was just like if a university student had a number of high school students to help him solve questions and study, it would naturally greatly increase his speed of solving questions and his learning efficiency. However, if there were more primary school students who helped this university student solve questions and study, the result would be, one could imagine, even if it wouldn't be a hindrance to his learning efficiency, it would be difficult for it to improve his efficiency by much before that. To Luo Fan, those false saints were like high school students to a university student. But now, these false saints were like primary school students to him. The increase in the gap was obviously the root cause of this result. Knowing that this change wouldn't bring him much benefits, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. His mind was pulled closer to the level of his body, which was to say that it was compatible with his body. At that time, the flow of light was billions of times faster than the outside world. When his mind returned to his body, he realized that the world in front of him was different. Compared to the last time, when he felt that he could only count time by breathing, this part of the world had been turned upside down. In the entire world, there were already 7,000 to 8,000 false saints. These false saints were distributed all over the world, using their own strength to divide up the entire world. This made the vast world seem a little crowded at this time. Apart from these 7,000 to 8,000 false saints, there were even more venerables below them. The number of level 9 false saints was unimaginable. It could be said that there were venerables everywhere, and level 9 false saints were like dogs. Such a terrifying scene pushed the cultivation civilization that was already extremely prosperous to a shocking level. It even reached a level that shocked even Luo Fan and made him feel that it was unimaginable. Amidst his shock, Luo Fan continued to observe. His expression changed slightly. Fortunately, I'm here now. Otherwise, the outcome would be unpredictable. The reason why his reaction was so great was very simple. It was because at this moment, he could clearly feel that there were thousands of inexplicable wills wandering around him. They were carrying out all kinds of subtle and mysterious arrangements, producing all kinds of incredible power. They wanted to break through the inexplicable defense that had naturally formed around his body and truly come into contact with his body. Looking at their postures and actions, although they were still far from success, they were already on the right path after all. If this continued, they might succeed after billions of trillion years. These billions of years seemed to be a very long period of time, but in the outside world, it was only a few breaths. After discovering this, Luo Fan let out a sigh and lifted his foot. His body, which had already become a part of the scenery of this world, had been eternally motionless for countless billions of years, had already disappeared from this place. When he reappeared, he was already in the depths of the laws and appeared in front of the cave abode of Hun Guzi and the others. This sudden change was very natural to Luo Fan. However, to the living beings in this world, it was a bolt from the blue. At this moment, the auras of thousands of false saints surged. Powerful auras spread out and filled the entire world. The world seemed to have entered a state of turmoil in an instant. It was as if the entire world would completely collapse and be destroyed in the next moment. What's going on? Why did the sacred origin disappear? This was the voice that echoed in the hearts of the many false saints. Luo Fan's existence had created thousands of false saints, and he had long been called the sacred origin by the living beings in this world. The sacred origin. The thousands of false saints quickly connected with each other and began to search for the reason for the disappearance of the sacred origin. It was a pity. How could they possibly find it? For a moment, an inexplicable atmosphere of panic began to linger in this world. All the cultivators who cultivated the cultivation system that was based on Luo Fan felt an indescribable pressure at this moment. There was even an indescribable sense of despair. Although the disappearance of Luo Fan had a huge impact on the false saints, it was not fatal. At most, they would no longer be able to rely on comprehending the mysteries of the true saint from Luo Fan to improve in their cultivation in the future. However, it did not affect the essence of their false saints at all. They were still eternal and indestructible. They were powerful existences that were almost omniscient and omnipotent. However, that was the case for them. This was not the case for those cultivators who had yet to become false saints. To those cultivators, the disappearance of Luo Fan was equivalent to forcefully cutting off their future. Without the sacred origin, how could they improve in the future? How could they break through the limits of life, prove their Tao, and become a supreme false saint? In this kind of despair. On the other hand, the thousands of pseudo-sages were being harassed like never before. One by one, the cultivators began to ask the false saints what was going on and how they should cultivate in the future. They asked the false saints if they still had a future and if there was any hope. The false saints were already bewildered by these questions, so how could they know the answer? For a moment, the false saints, who were originally willing to grant all requests, disappeared without a trace. This change caused the panic of all the cultivators in the world to increase even more. At this moment, Luo Fan, who had caused all of this, was already standing with Hun Guzi and the others. Hun Guzi and the others had helped Luo Fan impart his teachings and preach Tao all these years, nurturing the thousands of false saints who were based on him. However, this did not mean that they were not free and had been imparting Tao to Luo Fan in the world. They did not have to cultivate themselves. In fact, they would only occasionally send 1 or 2 clones to the world to perform rituals. Their true bodies had been working hard to cultivate in this cave abode and improve their cultivation realm. Fellow Taoist, I'm afraid that this will cause chaos in this world for a long time, Hun Guzi said in amusement. Hun Guzi and the others had naturally expected that Luo Fan would stop being a sacred source at a certain moment. Therefore, at this moment, although they felt that the timing of Luo Fan's departure was a little strange, they were not too surprised. It will be chaotic for a while, but once it stabilizes, they will obtain true autonomy and will no longer be restricted by me. This is definitely a good thing, Luo Fan said with a faint smile. He wasn't speaking carelessly. The truth was just as he had said. Without him, the cultivators who used him as a source would indeed be at a loss for a short period of time. They would even feel that their future had been cut off and that they had completely lost the possibility of becoming a false saint. However, that was only for a short period of time. After so many years of development, the cultivation system that used him as a source had long become complete and suitable. It could even be said to be broad and profound. Although his role was to be the foundation, it was no longer the only foundation. Although losing him would shake this cultivation system, in the end, the other cultivation foundations would definitely play a role. In the end, it would still be able to exist even without his foundation. Moreover, because of the loss of him this time, there would be the effect of destruction and establishment. Instead, it would truly transcend all shackles and truly become a perfect cultivation system that would not be shackled by any shackles. Luo Fan was very clear about this point. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Hun Guzi and the others only smiled. They naturally knew about this situation. However, they also knew that although this cultivation system would not completely collapse and cease to exist because of this, but, after losing Luo Fan, this cultivation system would also lose all its original advantages. From then on, it would fall to a level similar to other cultivation systems. In the end, the false saints who used this cultivation system to prove their Tao would also become ordinary false saints. However, this had nothing to do with them at all. To them, they were in a state where their lives could disappear at any time. In this state, it was too late for them to care about themselves. How could they have the energy to pay attention to others? Fellow Taoist, did you leave because you've completed your cultivation with their help? Hun Guzi changed the topic. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "It's not that I've completed my cultivation. It's just that their role has become extremely small." As he said that, a bolt of lightning suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's heart. He could not help but look at Hun Guzi and the others with a rather strange expression. The change in Luo Fan's gaze was instantly noticed by Hun Guzi and the others. For a moment they could not help but feel a little bewildered. At this moment, All of them had already admitted that Luo Fan was powerful and that they were far inferior to Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, they would not be able to resist at all if Luo Fan wanted to do anything to them. Under such circumstances, how could they not feel uneasy when the way Luo Fan looked at them suddenly changed? However, they were false sages after all, but they did not want to be entangled in such an unchangeable problem for too long. One of the false sages immediately asked, "Fellow Taoist, why are you looking at us like that?" Upon hearing this, Luo Fan's expression became serious and he said, "Do you know why my strength suddenly increased so much?" As soon as he said that, the faces of Hun Guzi and the others lit up. They knew very well that before they met those mysterious people, Luo Fan was clearly only at their current level. He might even be slightly weaker than them now. However, ever since he met those mysterious people, Luo Fan suddenly improved by many times. The great Tao had reached a height that they could not imagine. Even though they had improved to this level, they were still as insignificant as ants in front of a divine dragon when facing Luo Fan. How could they not be curious about such a sudden improvement? How could they not want to find out? However, this matter involved their personal secrets, so they did not dare to dwell on it. Now that Luo Fan suddenly took the initiative to talk about it, their interest was naturally piqued. "We'd like to hear the details," Hun Guzi and the others said in unison. When Luo Fan heard this, his expression became even more solemn. He said, "Actually, it's very simple. It's because I've already become the same as those in despair." Despair? The same? For a moment, the expressions of Hun Guzi and the others changed slightly. They were all false sages. How could they not know the many hidden meanings behind these two words? For a moment, their hearts were filled with anxiety. Luo Fan did not wait for them to think too much and said directly, "Previously, I didn't have enough ability to turn you guys into the same kind as them. However, after this cultivation, I already have this ability. If you guys are willing, I can try to turn you guys into them, or in other words, into our kind." Hearing this, Hun Guzi and the others held their breath. What did it mean to turn them into the same kind as them? It clearly meant that they could also be like Luo Fan, who had improved many times in an extremely short period of time, to the point where he could look at them as if they were ants. This was obviously a great temptation to them. How could they not want it? However, just as they were about to ask Luo Fan to help them, they forcefully held back those words. This was because they realized that something was wrong with the situation. If it was just to increase their strength, why did Luo Fan have such a solemn expression? Moreover, the words despair didn't sound auspicious no matter how they looked at it. For a moment, they felt apprehensive. Chapter 1540. When Hun Guzi and the others heard this, they looked confused. The existence of despair was a repulsive existence for anyone, even for existences like the false saint. Hearing that this kind of advancement would bring endless despair, even they had to consider it. However, it was obvious that just like how Luo Fan knew that becoming a despair being might bring endless despair, Hun Guzi and the others were also duty-bound to do the same. Everyone only thought about it for a while before they confirmed their thoughts. At that moment they said to Luo Fan, "Fellow Taoist, I hope that you can fulfill our wish." Since Luo Fan had already said it, he naturally wouldn't hesitate. He nodded and said, "Then everyone, get ready." After saying that, he raised his hand and enveloped the false saints under the true saint's tutelage. Moreover, at this moment, he even used his understanding of the origin of the realm to transmit his senses to Hun Guzi and the others through some kind of mysterious true saint profundity. Luo Fan couldn't understand this kind of mysterious true saint profundity at all. However, he was quite clear about it. This kind of true saint stage profundity had the ability to transmit one's senses to others. He was already quite sure about this from the process of using Ho Hua's senses to observe the origin of the realm. The mysterious true saint profundity was clearly beyond the perception range of Hun Guzi and the others. When this profundity was transmitted to them, they didn't react at all. They didn't have any reaction at all. They didn't even have the ability to look in the direction of the mysterious arrival. They directly allowed this profundity to connect with them. After connecting with Hunguzi and the others, these profound mysteries were extremely profound. After connecting with Hunguzi and the others, it naturally connected with their senses. Immediately after, Luo Fan had an inexplicable feeling that his senses had already been shared by some people. Upon discovering this, Luo Fan instantly knew that his previous guess was correct. As expected, he already possessed the ability that Ho Hua had displayed before. He already had the powerful ability to guide other false saints to become despair beings. What's going on? At this moment, the voices of Hunguzi and the others sounded and were instantly heard by Luo Fan. Their voices were mixed with indescribable shock. They were even shocked. Obviously, at this moment, Hunguzi and the others had already sensed everything that Luo Fan's senses had sensed. They had already truly understood how different the world in Luo Fan's eyes was from the world in their own eyes. Luo Fan looked at them and said, "This is the world calamity." As he spoke, he casually grabbed the obscure and inexplicable fluctuation that permeated the surroundings and waved it at Hunguzi and the others. Hunguzi and the others raised their hands, wanting to touch this fluctuation. They raised their hands to touch this fluctuation, but in the end, even though they could see their existence with the senses that Luo Fan had given them, if they really wanted to touch these fluctuations, then this fluctuation was simply too obscure and illusory. At this moment they could clearly see this fluctuation in front of them, but no matter how hard they tried to touch it, they found that the fluctuation was simply invisible and intangible. It was as illusory as an illusion. Upon discovering this, the shock in the eyes of Hunguzi and the others became even more intense. After waiting for them to properly experience the world in his senses, Luo Fan smiled faintly. "Everyone, please follow me." As he said this, his heart stirred slightly. With a tremble of his body, he had already directly stepped into the origin of the realm. Immediately after, the figures of Hunguzi and the others also directly appeared in the origin of the realm. They appeared in a row behind him. The origin of the realm was gray, and every wisp of it was the profound mystery of the true saint. Any one of them was enough for a false saint to spend hundreds of millions of years to comprehend. Facing such an origin of the realm, although Luo Fan had already seen it before, he was still extremely shocked, let alone Hunguzi and the others, who were seeing it for the first time. At this moment, their expressions had already turned sluggish. In his eyes there was an indescribable excitement. Previously, if they wanted to obtain a bit of the profound mystery of the true saint, they had to compete with the false saints under other true saints. In the end, they even fought with each other for many years before they succeeded. At this moment, in front of them, there was an endless expanse of the profound mystery of the true saint. If they could successfully comprehend every wisp of it, it might be able to make great progress in their cultivation realm. How could they not be shocked? Looking at their expressions, Luo Fan did not keep them in suspense. Instead, he directly explained, "This is the origin of the realm." The origin of the realm? What is the origin of the realm? Hunguzi frowned. They were extremely curious about everything in front of them and were extremely eager to know all the information about the gray existence in front of them. This is the product of the realm materialization. Or, to be more specific, it should be the appearance of the true saint realm materialization, Luo Fan said lightly. The true saint realm. The expressions on the faces of Hunguzi and the others suddenly became a little ugly. However, it seemed that because Luo Fan did not really say the final result, they still had some wishful thinking. At this moment, they were still not completely in despair. They were just waiting for Luo Fan's explanation. That's right, the true saint realm. Therefore, I'm sure all of you are very clear about what this means. This means that, if a false saint wants to turn the false into the real and become a true saint with the body of a false saint, they need to completely comprehend all the profound mysteries of the true saint realm here. Hunguzi's eyes flashed with despair as he said. Casually extracting a wisp of the endless profound mystery of the true saint realm in front of him would take him hundreds of millions of years to fully comprehend it. He might not even be able to fully comprehend it in the end. However, right now, there were countless profound mysteries of the true saint realm in front of him. Moreover, they needed to completely comprehend it to be able to take a step further and reach the goal that they originally thought they were only a step away from achieving. What a blow it was! What kind of despair was this? As a false saint, he should not have wishful thinking. However, at this moment, Hunguzi could not help but have an inexplicable feeling of wishful thinking. He looked at Luo Fan with a serious look of anticipation. He was hoping that Luo Fan would deny his guess. He was hoping that Luo Fan would say that his guess was correct. If he wanted to become a true saint, he did not need to fully comprehend the endless profound mysteries of the true saint realm in front of him. There was another way. Unfortunately, of course, Luo Fan would not give him another answer. Therefore, the answer he got was, according to my guess, yes. Upon hearing this, everyone, including Hunguzi, was dumbfounded. At this moment, they finally knew what it meant to be a desperate person. Luo Fan had experienced this stage before. He knew what they were feeling at this moment, but he did not disturb them or provoke them. He just stood there quietly, waiting for them to come back to their senses. After a while, Hunguzi and the others gradually came back to their senses. However, in their eyes, there was an inexplicable madness that had appeared in Ho Hua's and the others' eyes. That was the madness that came from the depths of despair, seeing them like this. Luo Fan sighed. His heart moved, and his body naturally separated from the origin of the realm. As he left the realm source, Hunguzi and the others also left the realm source. Luo Fan raised his hand and gently waved. The true saint profound mysteries that were originally connected to their bodies and their senses naturally shrank back. With a slight tremble, they disappeared without a trace. The whole process of disappearing was so strange that Luo Fan could not understand it at all. He could not find where he had disappeared to. Even now, Luo Fan still could not retain this true saint profound mysteries. In the end, of course, this was the current situation. Just like Luo Fan, after Hunguzi and the others borrowed Luo Fan's senses once, the world in their eyes had completely changed. Vaguely, they were able to retain some of the characteristics of Luo Fan's senses. Not only could they see the tribulation, but they could also feel the existence of the realm source. However, just like Luo Fan, they could only feel its existence at the beginning. They were still far from being able to enter it. However, Hunguzi and the others did not care about such progress at this time. At this moment, their hearts were filled with madness and despair. They even had a faint tendency to self-destruct. Fellow Taoists, please calm down. Luo Fan looked at them and sighed. I'm very calm. Hunguzi's calm voice seemed to be mixed with a volcano that could erupt at any time, causing irreparable and terrifying consequences. Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly. How could he say he was calm with such a performance? This was simply like a drunkard saying that he was not drunk, or a lunatic saying that he was normal. However, he only gave them some reminders and did not have any intention of forcing them to calm down. In any case, what happened in the end was their own business. Therefore, he kept his mouth shut. Although they had only entered the realm source for a short while, the flow of time in the realm source was faintly compatible with the normal time dimension of the Earth's universe. Therefore, at this time, an unknown number of trillions of years had passed in this world. The world underwent a drastic change once again. However, at this moment, the crowd no longer paid any attention to the drastic change in the sky. Hunguzi turned his head to look at the cave mansion that they had stayed in for an unknown number of trillions of years. A sneer suddenly appeared on his face. With a wave of his hand, his cave mansion collapsed and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Then, he raised his hand and squeezed gently. The vast thousand world that was constantly fighting with thousands of true divine abilities suddenly trembled and directly shattered into countless fragments of the world. The thousands of true saint divine abilities were instantly released, and the battle that was originally limited to a very small area began to spread endlessly. Under the raging of the divine abilities, the law layer began to become chaotic. The originally orderly and perfect law layer changed in an instant. The change in the law layer instantly caused the appearance of this world to gradually change, and all kinds of strange scenes were born out of thin air in this world. The entire world began to change violently. This kind of change was something that even a false sage could not grasp. Even the false sage didn't know what was going on. For a moment, an inexplicable panic lingered among all living beings. Even false saints were panicking at this time. Although the false saints of this world were stronger than the false saints of other worlds, due to the special characteristics of this world, what they could do to this world was much less than what other false saints could do to the world that they were born from. At the very least, in other worlds, it was a piece of cake for any false saint to completely destroy the world, let alone mastering the changes in the law layer of heaven and earth. However, here, to them, the law layer of heaven and earth represented mystery and unfathomable. It was vast and limitless, and it was impossible to control. The reason for this was not only because this world was extremely powerful, but also because there was the mysterious existence of the true saint in this world. The mysterious existence of the true saint was something that ordinary false saints could not master. It was a mystery that they could not even understand. Everything that was born from this profound mystery had the same special characteristic. A portion of the law layer of heaven and earth was also evolved from the mysterious existence of the true saint. Naturally, it was beyond the scope of what a false saint could understand and control. Thousands of true saint divine abilities fought and wreaked havoc. The aftermath of such a battle was enough to completely erase all traces of the world in other worlds. However, in this world, it could not even break through the barrier of the law layer. It could only wreak havoc above the law layer. Although it caused chaos in the law layer, at least it did not completely destroy the world. The scale of the battle between thousands of true saint divine abilities continued to expand, and the fluctuations produced continued to increase as time passed. The stirring of the law layer became more and more intense. This kind of endless growth was still under the restrictions of the world and could not be broken through. However, if it was allowed to evolve endlessly, it would eventually destroy everything in this world. Even if this destruction would not spread beyond the world due to the characteristics of this world, it would still be a great disaster. After all, Hunguzi and the others had lived in this world for a long time. All the changes in this world were the result of their mental strength. When they were truly crazy and in despair, they naturally hardened their hearts and wanted to let the true saint divine abilities destroy the world. However, after calming down a little, they were naturally no longer so extreme. With a slight sigh, they did not need to discuss. They each raised their hands and the true saint divine abilities that belonged to them instantly left the battlefield and were all withdrawn by them. In the blink of an eye, the battle between thousands of true saint divine abilities disappeared without a trace. The chaos in the law layer began to slowly recover under the effect of the great Tao of heaven and earth. The chaos gradually subsided. Not long after, everything returned to its original state. As the law layer returned to its original state, the various scenes in this world also began to gradually return to normal. It's back to normal. When everything calmed down, the false saints of this world still had lingering fears. To them, everything that had happened just now was so strange, so unreal, and it made them suddenly realize how weak they really were. Luo Fan looked at the performance of Hunguzi and the others. He smiled faintly and felt relieved. At least for now, it seemed that they were not crazy to the point of losing their mind. At the very least, it showed that they could still understand. After obtaining the senses of the people in despair, Hunguzi and the others already had the ability to break through the huge gap in the flow of time. Even in this world, they could already see the scene outside the world like Luofan and see the battle between Emperor Jin and Qianguo. I didn't expect that I'm still a frog at the bottom of a well. Hunguzi sighed. After witnessing the realm's origin, he realized that the gains he'd obtained from cultivating for billions of trillions of years were insignificant. It was not even 1/1000th of the true saint esoteric that they needed to comprehend next. Under such circumstances, one could imagine how they felt when they saw the terrifying power of Emperor Jin. We are all frogs at the bottom of a well, Luofan sighed. Compared to true saints and existences at the level of Emperor Jin, Luofan, Hunguzi, and the other false saints were really like frogs at the bottom of a well. Hearing this, Hunguzi and the others smiled bitterly. What are you doing? At this moment, a voice came into everyone's ears. Then, several figures appeared in front of everyone out of thin air. They were the false saints under Jing Yitzi and the other true saints. It was clear that the various changes that had occurred in this world had occurred before. I just saw some things that made me feel despair. Hunguzi smiled helplessly. Jing Yitzi looked at Hunguzi and the others and found that each of them looked very different from before. Jing Yitzi looked at Hunguzi and the others and found that each of them looked very different from before, even on the surface. However, they were no longer perturbed, but there was still a trace of anticipation in their hearts. What exactly happened? Jing Yitzi frowned. A false saint was an existence that had an extremely firm mind and could even be said to be stubborn. A false saint had an extremely firm mind and could even be said to be an existence that was stubborn. Its will itself was extremely difficult to change. What exactly could make a false saint undergo such an obvious and huge change in such a short period of time? What on earth could make a pseudo-saint undergo such an obvious and huge change in such a short period of time? Jing Yitzi and the others couldn't figure it out no matter how they thought about it. This kind of thing couldn't be explained clearly. Hunguzi sighed and glanced at Luofan. Luofan knew what he meant at a glance. And it was impossible for Jing Yitzi and the others not to know what he meant. Just as they were about to ask Luofan, Luofan had already spoken. Luofan smiled and said, I do have the intention to tell all of you. However, this matter is quite demanding of all of you, and with your abilities, I am unable to do it. What he said was not a lie. To lend his senses to other false saints, other than the requirements for himself, there were also many requirements for the strength, cultivation, and realm of the false saint who was under his senses. He didn't talk about the other specific requirements. At the very least, the false saint who was under his senses should at least have sufficient control over the true saint remarkable powers. Otherwise, if they couldn't even control their own true saint remarkable powers and couldn't even sense the true saint mysteries contained in the true saint remarkable powers, how could they understand the endless true saint mysteries in the origin of the realm? How could they possibly withstand the pressure of the origin of the realm? Hearing Luofan's words, Jing Yitzi and the others couldn't help but frown. They were false saints under a true saint. Although it hadn't been smooth sailing all this while, they had advanced to this stage. They had long become omnipotent and omniscient. They were synonymous with everything. It had been hundreds of millions of years since they had encountered someone who looked down on them for not being strong enough to know certain things. Now that they had encountered it again, it naturally didn't feel good. However, they weren't strong enough. So what if they didn't feel good? Therefore, Jing Yitzi could only smile bitterly. However, since everyone is in despair now, what do you plan to do next? After smiling bitterly, Jing Yitzi became curious again. Plan. I plan to give up the false saint godhead of this world, Hunguzi said with a sigh. Give up? Jing Yitzi couldn't help but be surprised when he heard that. After being surprised, he couldn't help but feel shocked. What kind of despair could make someone like Hunguzi, who had spent a lot of energy and time on this false saint godhead, so disheartened that he decided to give up this false saint godhead? At this moment, he suddenly felt a little uneasy. There were countless inexplicable guesses in his mind, and he wanted to find out what exactly caused this kind of despair. Of course, without any source of information, it was obviously impossible for this kind of guess to succeed. However, this kind of guess was not useless. At the very least, these kinds of guesses made Jing Yixi start to be suspicious. Give up the false saint godhead of this world? Luo Fan asked curiously. Don't tell me that everyone still doesn't understand how precious this false saint godhead is? This is an existence that other people in despair would even fight with each other to obtain. I naturally understand that this godhead is useful to people in despair. However, the current me is still too far from being able to use this godhead. Hunguzi sighed. The other false saints also had helpless expressions on their faces. They obviously had the same feeling. Still far from it. Jing Yixi listened to their conversation, and he had more guesses in his heart. There was even an inexplicable wild thought in his mind. Could it be that they know the harshness of becoming a true saint, and now they are feeling despair because of that harsh requirement? It shouldn't be, after all, it's a false saint. Chapter 1541. However, Jing Yixi didn't know that the thought he gave up was the real answer. Hunguzi and the others clearly didn't care about what Jing Yixi was thinking. At this moment, after they made their decision, an inexplicable wave of energy began to slowly radiate from their bodies. This wave of energy was so mysterious and incredible that it vaguely connected to the great Tao of heaven and earth. In an instant, an inexplicable power descended from heaven and earth and directly enveloped Hunguzi and the others. Under this inexplicable wave of energy, wisps of a strange existence were slowly extracted from Hunguzi and the others. Even the current Luo Fan couldn't see through this existence at all. He couldn't tell what it was, but he knew that this existence was extremely important. After losing this existence, Hunguzi and the others, as well as the world, began to change. The aura of Hunguzi and the others began to weaken as this existence was extracted. It was as if their power and everything else was being extracted along with this process. At the same time, all sorts of inexplicable phenomena appeared in the world. The entire world was shaking slightly, and an inexplicable voice of sorrow echoed in every corner of the world. Even the false saints felt an inexplicable sense of sorrow when they heard this voice. However, they also vaguely felt an inexplicable sense of relaxation amidst this sorrow. All sorts of feelings merged together. It was as if some kind of existence that brought them endless pressure, but also countless benefits to them, was gradually leaving. At this moment, in the great Tao, the 10 strange spacetimes that Hunguzi and the others had used to become false saints slowly collapsed. Among them, the essence of the false saints that belonged to Hunguzi and the others slowly separated and returned to their bodies. All of this showed that Hunguzi and the others were really giving up on the false saint godhood. Only Hunguzi and the others had stepped into the origin of the realm with the help of Luo Fan's senses. At this moment, they had already experienced an earth-shattering improvement and were completely different from before. Therefore, they could give up on the false saint godhood so easily and freely. If they were normal false saints, it would not be easy to give up the false sage godhood. He had to prepare for it for an unknown number of years, expend an unknown amount of energy, and suffer an unknown amount of pain. In the end, he might even have to risk his life to achieve it. How could he be as relaxed and at ease as he was now? With just a thought, the false saint godhead would naturally leave his body? Naturally, it had already disappeared into their bodies? Hunguzi and the others had spent countless billions of years to become false saints in this world, using the profound mysteries of true saint. However, at this moment they wanted to give up on the false saint heavenly divinity, and the speed at which they did so was extremely fast. In just a few short days, all the changes in the world, including the changes that had occurred to Hunguzi and the others, had completely disappeared. Everything had returned to normal. The only difference was that in this world, there was no longer a false saint who had proven his Tao with the profound mysteries of a true saint. The many living beings in the world now had an even more powerful and wider path to choose from, and it was easy for them to do so. Jing Yitzi and the others were even more bewildered when they saw Hunguzi and the others give up the fake saint godhood so decisively. This kind of thing. But it was beyond their understanding. At the same time, it also brought them more and more pressure. More and more intense pressure. What exactly was it that made them give up the fake saint godhood that they had painstakingly planned for so many years? What were they hiding from? What were they afraid of? If it was for the sake of those mysterious powerhouses, why didn't they hide or be afraid back then? Instead, they only hid and were afraid now that their strength seemed to have improved greatly? All of this was a mystery to them. Hunguzi and the others obviously didn't have the mood to solve the problem for Hunguzi and the others. At this moment they felt relaxed. Although the false saint godhood that they had achieved with the profound mysteries of true saint had left, and logically speaking, their strength should have been greatly affected, each of them still looked relaxed. When they had the false saint godhood just now, they had a deep understanding of the profound mysteries of true saint and could constantly feel that they were getting closer to the true saint realm under the effect of the profound mysteries. However, that feeling was a little illusory, as if it was just their wishful thinking. The truth behind it was even more complicated and shocking. Although they had lost the comprehension they gained from the great Tao of heaven and earth, the illusory feeling had disappeared without a trace. After discovering this, they all felt happy about their previous decision to give up on the false saint godhood. Seeing that everything was settled, Luo Fan said to Hunguzi and the others, "Fellow Taoists, you are now free. However, for the sake of caution, I suggest that you don't leave this world at this time." Hearing this, Hunguzi and the others nodded. What Luo Fan could think of, they could also easily think of. At this moment, the Jin Emperor was fighting with Qianguo and the others outside this world. Although Luo Fan and Hunguzi were not the Jin Emperor's targets, who knew if the Jin Emperor would be capricious and think that Luo Fan and the others had offended her by appearing in front of her? If that happened, she might just come over and make them kneel. This was the tragedy of not having enough strength. Even though they knew that they were not the Jin Emperor's targets, they still needed to be cautious and vigilant when facing this opponent. We have just come into contact with the desperate ones. However, we need to comprehend it well so that we can become the real desperate ones. Otherwise, a dabbler like him might not be able to show off. I'm afraid it's a bit embarrassing. Hunguzi sighed. Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded in understanding. At this moment, a voice spread across the world and instantly rang in the ears of every living being in this world. However, this voice was so mysterious that even if it rang in the ears of all living beings, they wouldn't be able to understand what the voice was saying. Even after the voice ended, their memories were naturally erased. They didn't even know that this voice existed before. Even after the voice ended, their memories were naturally erased. They didn't even know that this voice existed before. He's so decisive. It seems that we almost missed such a good seedling this time. It was a woman's voice. Hearing this voice, Luo Fan's countenance changed. He instantly recognized that this was the Jin Emperor's voice. He could tell that this was the Jin Emperor's voice, so he wasn't surprised by the mysteriousness contained in this voice. However, this was the first time Hunguzi and the others heard the Jin Emperor's voice. For a moment, their countenances changed drastically, and their eyes revealed a look of disbelief. They had never imagined that there could be such a powerful and terrifying existence in this world. But it wasn't a true divine existence. At this moment, just this voice alone was enough to intimidate them. They couldn't control themselves, and it was difficult for them to have any thoughts of resistance. In fact, only Luo Fan's group of 11 could understand and remember this voice. Other than them, no other living beings in this world could do this. It was the same for Jing Yitzi and the others. Although their expressions didn't change much at this moment, there was an inexplicable confusion in their eyes. However, they were puzzled in their hearts. What happened to these people who were at the same level as them just now? Why did their countenances suddenly change drastically at that moment? They showed such an incomprehensible attitude, as if they were afraid, so its Senior Gene Emperor. May I know what instructions you have for me? Luo Fan asked. Being able to bow and submit was a must-have skill for any pseudo-sage. Luo Fan was a desperator who surpassed false saint. Naturally, he was more adept at using this skill. You know me? The Gene Emperor asked curiously. However, as soon as she said that, she reacted and said, "It seems that you've been listening from the side all this time. This is a pretty good main character. You can actually guide other false saints to become desperators in such a short period of time. It's a pity that you don't have a refined world now. Otherwise, my harvest this time would have been several times greater." Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly felt a little lucky. However, he could only ignore what he didn't want to hear from the Gene Emperor and said, "Thank you for your compliment, Senior." At this moment, the Gene Emperor couldn't be bothered with Luo Fan anymore. She directly turned to Hunguzi and the others and said, "It's not good news for me that you guys gave up the false saint godheads so easily. You know that I need these false saint godheads, right?" These words made Hunguzi and the others break out in cold sweat. "However, you guys don't have to worry. Although I need these godheads, I don't necessarily need to take them from you. I just need to have such a godhead. Now, you guys have two choices. First, I'll kill you to vent my anger. Second, you guys can create these false saint godheads again. What do you guys think?" The Gene Emperor said indifferently. It could be expected that she was still engaged in an extremely fierce battle with Qianguo and the others at this moment. However, even in such a situation, she still didn't seem anxious at all. There was only leisurely and ease in her voice, as if she was in control of everything. Hearing this, was there a need to say more about how Hunguzi and the others chose? They immediately indicated that they would choose the second option one by one. The Gene Emperor had already made it very clear that she needed this godhead, but she didn't care who it was. Therefore, if they wanted to create this godhead again, they didn't need to act on their own at all. They didn't need to use the true saint-level mysteries to prove their Tao and become saints again. Instead, they only needed to cultivate false saints that could prove their Tao and become saints with the true saint-level mysteries. To them, this was not a difficult task at all. Moreover, they didn't even need to trick other cultivators. They could directly explain the matter to them. They could directly explain this matter to the false saint godheads or even their lives if they used the true saint-level mysteries to prove their Tao and become false saints. Countless cultivators would definitely be willing to be cultivated by them. To accept such a fake saint status. Both Luo Fan and Hunguzi were well aware of this. The Gene Emperor smiled and said, "That's good. I hope that by the next time I come, you will have settled this matter." She didn't say anything threatening, but everyone present could clearly feel that if they didn't agree to her request, she would definitely kill them. What kind of terrifying consequences would it bring? Hearing this, everyone naturally agreed in unison. The Gene Emperor didn't insist. After seeing the change in everyone's expression, he didn't waste any more words and immediately left the area, disappearing naturally. "It seems we still have to stay in this world for a while." Luo Fan looked at Hunguzi and the others and smiled helplessly. Hunguzi and the others' expressions didn't change, but there was both helplessness and relief in their eyes. They were helpless because they had to cultivate other cultivators to become false saints like them. On the other hand, they were relieved because they had already received a promise from the Gene Emperor, who was the strongest powerhouse in this world. They knew that as long as they completed this matter, they wouldn't have to worry about being erased by the Gene Emperor. Although this promise couldn't be completely trusted, it was still much better than before. Although Jing Yizhi and the others had been standing at the side, they didn't know what exactly happened here. They didn't understand why these people, who were originally about the same level as them, suddenly became so unfathomable. For a moment, all kinds of inexplicable emotions emerged in their hearts. He did not understand why these people, who were originally about the same level as him, had suddenly become so unfathomable. For a moment, all kinds of inexplicable emotions surged in his heart. Understanding this, he couldn't help but reveal an indescribable bitterness on his face. Understanding this, he couldn't help but reveal an indescribable bitterness on his face. This situation. He had never thought that something like this would actually happen to him and happen to him. After all, as a false saint who had mastered the true saint mystique, he was absolutely invincible in front of other false saints. Even false saints who also had the true saint mystique were on par with him. It was precisely because of this that Jing Yizhi acted so nonchalantly, as if he didn't care about anything at all. Even the battle between Hengguzi's and Luo Yunyang's camps was handled with the attitude of a spectator. However, since the appearance of Luo Fan, the situation began to develop in a way that was beyond his imagination. First, Luo Fan left all the disciples behind him with an unstoppable momentum. Immediately after that, the mysterious powerhouse appeared, making him truly feel how insignificant he was. Finally, at this moment, Hengguzi and the others, who were originally about the same level as him, suddenly couldn't enter a level that he couldn't imagine and understand. All of this gave Jing Yizhi a huge impact on his heart, making him suddenly doubt whether his previous decision was correct. Fortunately, a false saint was a false saint after all. Although he was doubtful for a moment, when he thought of his own path and his character, Jing Yizhi quickly calmed down and his expression became calm again. No matter how strong they become, I'm still me. I'm not the same as them. After calming down, Jing Yizhi began to chuckle. I didn't expect fellow Taoists to become so unfathomable. It's really admirable. Seeing that Jing Yizhi still maintained the same attitude at this time, Luo Fan couldn't help but admire him. If fellow Taoist is willing, it's actually possible, Luo Fan said with a smile. Is fellow Taoist referring to the matter of proving one's Tao with the true saint mystique? Jing Yizhi also smiled. He had witnessed the entire process of Hengguzi and the others giving up the false saint mystique. At this time, he naturally knew that the true saint mystique in this world was empty again. If they were interested, they could already start to prove their Tao and become a sage with the true saint mystique. This is one of the steps. Luo Fan shook his head and said. Jing Yizhi was curious. One of the steps? That's right. If you're willing, you might be able to raise your cultivation to a certain point after becoming a false saint with the mystery of true saint. In that case, I'll be able to bring you to the same realm as them, said Luo Fan with a smile. Hearing this, Jing Yizhi smiled and said, That's not everything. Of course not all of them. This was a risk he had to take. That was because the false saint godhood was created by using the true saint mystery to become a false saint. It had already been predetermined by some extremely powerful existence. If fellow Taoist can give up the false sage position in time and let other cultivators take it before that existence comes to harvest the false sage position, fellow Taoist will be safe. But if you can't, then I'm afraid the result won't be good enough. Luo Fan smiled. Jing Yizhi shook her head and said, Forget it. This kind of thrill and excitement is not suitable for me. I think my current state is pretty good. Moreover, fellow Taoists, although you've all become much more powerful, you've all become much more powerful than before. But it doesn't seem to be as good as before. Hengguzi and the others looked at each other when they heard Jing Yizhi's words and saw the bitterness in each other's eyes. Although Jing Yizhi was just an ant to them, they had to admit it. Jing Yixi's judgment of them was very accurate. Although they had come into contact with the despair realm and possessed terrifying power that they had never imagined before, their hearts were filled with despair, and they did not feel as good as before. As expected, Jing Yixi was even more confident when he saw everyone's expressions. He smiled and greeted everyone. Then, he took a step forward and disappeared before everyone's eyes. He went directly to the cave abode that he had opened up in this world. His cave abode was a boundless world. It was attached to this world, and the various scenes inside were almost beyond everyone's imagination. There were all kinds of strange laws. There were all kinds of novel and interesting laws, and all kinds of wonderful battles. Everything was enough to make people enjoy it and forget to leave. It was obvious that everything was arranged according to his interests. Seeing Jing Yixi and the others leave, Hun Guzi and the others shook their heads and smiled. At this moment, they somewhat admired Jing Yixi and the others' attitude towards cultivation. Of course, admiration was one thing, but to ask them to give up their cultivation and strength that had come into contact with the despair realm and cultivate like them, this was something they were unwilling to do no matter what. Next, let's begin, Hun Guzi said to everyone. Although Luo Fan was the strongest among them and also the one who contributed the most to the creation of this world, he had the highest authority in this world. However, because Hun Guzi had stayed in this world billions and trillions of times longer than Luo Fan, how could Luo Fan compare to him in terms of familiarity with this world? Therefore, he was the one who made the arrangement. No one had any objections to this point, especially Luo Fan. He was happy and relaxed. After all, he was not a common person who would fight for the right to control and speak in any matter. When everyone heard Hun Guzi's words, they only responded calmly. Seeing that no one had any objections, Hun Guzi immediately announced to all living beings in this world that he was going to accept a disciple somewhere in this world. Originally, Hun Guzi and the others had a supreme status in this world. Even false saints called them existences on the same level as patriarch. Even though they had disappeared for so many years, their legends still circulated in this world. At this moment, when he said he was going to accept a disciple, not only ordinary cultivators, but even false saints were tempted. It could be said that Hun Guzi's voice transmission alone had stirred up the entire world. Countless living beings began to rush in the direction pointed out by Hun Guzi and the others from all over the world. At this moment, after announcing that they were going to accept a disciple, Hun Guzi and the others spread out their divine senses and began to envelop the entire world. They carefully sensed every cultivator who wanted to acknowledge them as their master and wanted to become their disciple. From this step, they were already observing and testing those cultivators. They wanted to see who among the endless cultivators had the most promising future and who was the most suitable to be nurtured as their successor or rather, scapegoat. This was obviously a long-term process.